at @LennoxFord_truth, Twitter/X thread. Posted March 15th, 2025, 3:47 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thread 123rd. Okay, something seriously fucked up just happened. I'm sitting in my apartment in downtown Reno, working on my piece about the Pentagon's black budget discrepancies, when every screen in my place, laptop, phone, TV, even my smart thermostat, cuts to that bone-chilling emergency broadcast system tone. You know the one. That flat, mechanical shriek that makes your spine crawl even when it's just a test. But this wasn't a test. Emergency alert. Military personnel are establishing security perimeters in designated Reno sectors. Civilians must avoid areas marked with yellow barriers. This is not a drill. Comply immediately for your safety. The alert lasted maybe 15 seconds, then everything returned to normal. Netflix resumed mid-episode. My Spotify picked up where it left off. Like nothing happened, except I can still hear that tone echoing in my ears. 3:52 p.m. I'm looking out my window right now, and I can see yellow tape being strung across Virginia Street, maybe 6 blocks north. Military vehicles, not National Guard, actual fucking military, setting up what looks like a perimeter. Heavy trucks, personnel in full combat gear. This isn't some training exercise. My neighbor Mrs. Chun is standing on her balcony taking photos with her phone. Smart lady. I'm doing the same. 3:58 p.m. Just checked local news. Nothing. Not a single mention of military activity in Reno. Not even a weather advisory. KOH and KRNV are running their usual afternoon programming like it's any other Tuesday. Either every news outlet in northern Nevada is asleep at the wheel, or someone doesn't want this getting out. Guess which one I'm betting on. 4:03 p.m. The perimeter is expanding. I can see soldiers, actual soldiers, not cops, setting up barriers on Sierra Street now too. They're moving with purpose, like they've done this before. Like they have a specific plan. What the hell is in those sectors that requires military containment in downtown Reno? 4:07 p.m. DM from @MaisyT_F just came through. Saw your thread. Meet me at the Peppermill parking garage, level 3, northeast corner. Come alone. Bring nothing electronic except your phone. 1 hour. I've never heard of this account before. Profile shows Air Force insignia, created in 2019, barely any followers. Could be anyone. Could also be exactly what I need right now. 4:15 p.m. Walking to the Peppermill. The streets feel wrong. Not empty. There are still people around, traffic moving normally. But there's this tension in the air. Like the moment before a thunderstorm when all the birds go quiet. The military perimeter has expanded again. I can see yellow barriers on 4th Street now, maybe 8 blocks from my apartment. Whatever they're containing, it's big. 4:28 p.m. Something's not right with the barriers themselves. From a distance, they look like standard military tape, but up close, the yellow isn't quite yellow. It's like looking at a color that doesn't have a name. Makes my eyes water if I stare too long. Mrs. Chun stopped taking photos. When I asked her why, she just shook her head and went inside. Locked her balcony door behind her. 4:45 p.m. At the Peppermill garage. Level 3 northeast corner, just like she said. There's a woman here, mid-30s, wearing civilian clothes but standing with military posture. Short blonde hair, sharp eyes that seem to catalog everything. "Lennox Ford?" she asks. "That's me, Maisie Thorne. Thanks for coming." She hands me a manila envelope. Thick. Heavy. What is this? Proof that what you're seeing downtown is just the beginning. 5:12 p.m. Back home. Holy shit. Holy shit. The envelope contained 12 pages of what looked like internal military communications. Classification stamps I've never seen before. References to geometric anomalies and spatial noncompliance in sectors of downtown Reno. But here's the thing that's making my hands shake as I type this. Every single document is time-stamped March 18th, 2025. That's 3 days from now. 5:18 p.m. I've covered government conspiracies for 8 years. I know how to spot forged documents. These aren't forgeries. The paper has the right weight, the right texture. The classification stamps are embossed, not printed. The signatures match samples I have from other leaked Air Force communications. These are real documents from 3 days in the future. Either Maisie Thorne has access to time travel or something in those sealed sectors of Reno is fucking with causality itself. 5:24 p.m. One of the documents references Subject S. Greer as a civilian asset inside the primary manifestation zone. I ran the name through social media searches. Found her. Sybil Greer, 28, lives on West 2nd Street, right in the middle of the sealed area. Her last Twitter post was 2 hours ago. The buildings here are growing new rooms. Rooms that weren't there this morning. I've been in my apartment for 6 years, and I just found a door I've never seen before. 5:31 p.m. I tried calling the numbers listed in Maisie's documents. All disconnected or not in service. The addresses reference military facilities that don't officially exist. But the geometric symbols printed at the bottom of each page, I've been staring at them for 20 minutes now. They're simple, just lines and angles, but something about them makes me feel like I'm forgetting something important. Like there's a word on the tip of my tongue that I can't quite remember. 5:37 p.m. Update from Sybil Greer's account. The new door leads to a hallway that's longer than my building is wide. I walked for 10 minutes and didn't reach the end. When I turned around, my apartment door was right behind me. The hallway is still there. She posted a video. Shaky phone footage of a narrow corridor with walls that seem to bend in ways that hurt to look at directly. 5:43 p.m. I need to get inside that perimeter. I need to talk to Sybil Greer face to face. I need to understand what the hell is happening in my city. Maisie said the documents were proof that what I'm seeing is just the beginning. Beginning of what? 5:47 p.m. Something just occurred to me. I've been assuming the military is trying to contain something that appeared in downtown Reno. But what if they're not containing something that arrived? What if they're trying to contain something that was always here and just recently woke up? Thread paused, investigating further. We'll update as situation develops. If something happens to me, if these posts suddenly stop or get deleted, you'll know I was onto something big. Bigger than government cover-ups. Bigger than classified operations. Something that makes the military hand out documents from the future and seal off city blocks like they're quarantining reality itself. More to follow. Lennox, at LennoxFord_truth, Twitter/X thread. Posted March 16th, 2025, 7:23 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thread 1/28. Didn't sleep last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those geometric symbols from Maisie's documents. They're burned into my retinas like staring at a bright light too long. But here's the thing that's really fucking with my head. I think I understand what they mean. Not intellectually. Not like reading a language. It's deeper than that. Like remembering something I knew before I was born. 7:31 a.m. Spent the night researching the symbols online. Reverse image searches turn up nothing. Posted them on conspiracy forums and got banned from 3 sites within an hour. No explanation. Just gone. Someone really doesn't want these spreading. 7:38 a.m. New post from Sybil Greer. Found 3 more doors in my apartment overnight. One leads to my neighbor's kitchen, but Mr. Petrov moved out 6 months ago and the apartment's been empty since. Still has his coffee mug on the counter. Still warm. Another door opens onto West 2nd Street, but it's West 2nd Street from 1987. I can tell because the old Fitzgerald's casino sign is still up. I watched a woman in 80s clothes walk by. She looked right at me and waved. The third door. I don't want to talk about the third door yet. 7:44 a.m. I've been cross-referencing Sybil's reports with the leaked documents. Every anomaly she describes matches terminology in those future-dated files. Temporal displacement. Architectural noncompliance. Spatial bleeding. Like someone wrote a manual for impossibility. 7:52 a.m. Local news is finally covering the military presence, but their story is complete bullshit. KRNV Channel 4 News. Military exercises in downtown Reno conclude successfully today. Officials report all objectives met and no civilian restrictions remain in effect. Normal traffic patterns expected to resume by noon. I'm looking out my window right now. The barriers are still there. More of them than yesterday. And that yellow tape. I swear it's moving. Writhing like something alive. 8:15 a.m. Got a notification that 3 of my posts from yesterday were flagged for misinformation and temporarily restricted. The flags came from an account called @CamdenR_cybersec. Profile shows NSA credentials and a bio that just says Information Integrity Specialist. Camden Ross. Never heard of him before yesterday, but he's been systematically targeting every post I've made about the Reno situation. Someone's watching me. 8:23 a.m. DM from Maisie Thorne. Your posts are being monitored. Camden Ross isn't just flagging you, he's building a case. National security implications. Meet me at the abandoned Blockbuster on Kayetsk, behind the dumpsters. 30 minutes. We need to talk. Why does every contact in this situation sound like a bad spy novel? 8:41 a.m. Walking to the meeting spot. The city feels different in daylight. People are going about their business, coffee shops, traffic, normal Tuesday morning stuff, but there's something in their eyes. Like they all know something's wrong, but nobody wants to be the first to say it. Past a group of kids waiting for the school bus. One of them, maybe 8 years old, was drawing those geometric symbols in the dirt with a stick. When I stopped to look, she looked up at me and said, "The lines want to be drawn." Then the bus came, and she got on like nothing happened. 9:02 a.m. Met with Maisie behind the Blockbuster. She looked tired. Scared maybe. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Worse than you think. Better than it could be." She handed me a new envelope. Thicker than yesterday's. These are from March 20th. 4 days from now. Read them carefully, Lennox. And whatever you do, don't post the symbols that are in there. Not yet. Why not? Because some knowledge is viral. Once it's out there, it spreads. Changes people. And we're not ready for that kind of change. 9:18 a.m. Back home. The new documents are, Christ, I don't even know how to describe them. They reference a knowledge containment protocol and something called cognitive quarantine procedures. But the language gets weird toward the end. Military jargon mixed with terms I don't recognize. Words that might not even be English. And the symbols. Page after page of them. More complex than the ones from yesterday. Looking at them makes my teeth ache. 9:31 a.m. Update from Sybil. The third door leads to my apartment, but it's my apartment from when I was 7 years old, living with my grandmother in Phoenix. Everything's exactly the same. Even the smell of her cigarettes and lavender soap. Grandma's there. She's been dead for 15 years, but she's there, making pancakes in the kitchen. When she saw me, she smiled and said, "I've been waiting for you to come home, sweetheart." I ate breakfast with my dead grandmother in my childhood kitchen, through a door that shouldn't exist in an apartment in Reno. The pancakes tasted exactly right. 9:37 a.m. I need to talk to Sybil directly. Posted a public reply asking if she's okay, if she needs help getting out of the sealed area. Her response came back in 11 seconds. I can't leave. Not because of the barriers. Because I don't want to. This place is showing me things I forgot I lost. Things I didn't know I was missing. That's not the response of someone who needs rescue. That's the response of someone who's being seduced. 9:45 a.m. Another flag from Camden Ross. This one on my post about the geometric symbols. The notification said content violates community guidelines regarding harmful instructional material. Instructional material? What the fuck are these symbols supposed to instruct? 9:52 a.m. I've been staring at the new symbols for 20 minutes now. They're starting to make sense. Not like code being cracked, but like a song you've heard before but couldn't remember the words to. There's a pattern in them. A logic. They're trying to show me something. Something about the shape of space itself. 10:07 a.m. Holy shit. Holy shit. I just realized what I'm looking at. These aren't random symbols. They're blueprints. Architectural plans for geometries that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. And I think I know how to build them. 10:15 a.m. New post from Sybil, and this one's different. The text is normal, but between the words, almost invisible, are tiny versions of the geometric symbols. You have to look carefully to see them, but once you do, you can't unsee them. Had dinner with Grandma again. She told me the doors aren't new. They were always there. We just forgot how to see them. She says the people outside, the ones with the barriers and the uniforms, they're not trying to keep us in. They're trying to keep everyone else out. Some gifts, she said, are too precious to share with those who aren't ready to receive them. 10:23 a.m. I need to stop looking at these symbols. Every time I do, I understand more. And the more I understand, the less I want to understand. But I can't stop. It's like trying not to think of a pink elephant. The knowledge is in my head now, growing, connecting to other thoughts, other memories, making me remember things that haven't happened yet. 10:31 a.m. Camden Ross just sent me a direct message. Mr. Ford, your recent posts have triggered several national security protocols. For your own safety and the safety of others, please cease all investigation into the Reno situation immediately. This is not a threat. This is a warning from someone who's seen what happens when certain knowledge spreads unchecked. 10:38 a.m. Fuck Camden Ross. Fuck national security. Fuck warnings. If they're so concerned about me spreading dangerous knowledge, maybe they shouldn't have let that knowledge exist in the first place. I'm going to figure out what's really happening in those sealed sectors. I'm going to talk to Sybil Greer face to face. I'm going to understand what these symbols mean and why they make my brain feel like it's expanding. And I'm going to share everything I learn with the world. Some knowledge is too important to contain, even if the people trying to contain it are right about how dangerous it is. 10:44 a.m. Looking out my window again. The barriers have moved closer. Not by much, maybe half a block, but they're definitely closer than they were this morning. The sealed area is growing. And I swear to God, something on the other side of that yellow tape is looking back at me. Thread continues. More updates as they develop. The truth is coming, whether they want it to or not. Lennox, at LennoxFord_truth, Twitter/X thread. Posted, March 16th, 2025, 2:47 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thread 132nd. I'm writing this from inside a coffee shop 3 blocks from the yellow barriers. I can see soldiers through the window, but they're not looking at civilians anymore. They're all facing inward, toward whatever they're containing. Their body language has changed. Yesterday they moved with purpose. Today they look scared. 2:52 p.m. Automated phone alert just came through. Voice was slightly distorted, like a recording played through water. Attention citizens, individuals experiencing geometric hallucinations, recurring symbols in vision, or temporal displacement phenomena should report to designated processing centers immediately. Early intervention prevents cognitive contamination. Cognitive contamination. They have a name for what's happening to me. 2:58 p.m. I need to tell you something. This morning, I found symbols carved into my bathroom mirror. Deep gouges in the glass, forming those same geometric patterns from Maisie's documents. Here's the thing, I live alone. My apartment was locked. No signs of break-in. And the symbols, they weren't scratched into the surface. They were grown from inside the glass itself, like crystalline structures forming from within the material. 3:05 p.m. I touched one of the symbols. Just a light touch with my fingertip. For exactly 3.7 seconds, I could see through the walls of my apartment, through the walls of the building next door, through the barriers the military set up. I could see Sybil Greer sitting in her kitchen, having tea with 3 different versions of herself. One from childhood, one from now, and one that looked older, maybe her from the future. They were all laughing at something. When my vision returned to normal, my fingertip was bleeding. The symbol had cut me, but the cut was in the shape of another, smaller symbol. 3:12 p.m. DM from Camden Ross. Mr. Ford, your biometric readings indicate exposure to Class 7 cognitive hazards. Report to the federal building immediately for decontamination. This is not optional. Failure to comply will result in enhanced containment protocols. How the fuck does he have my biometric readings? 3:19 p.m. I'm going to try to get closer to the barriers. I need to understand what's really happening inside that perimeter. Maisie warned me that some knowledge is viral, that it spreads and changes people. But maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe the military isn't trying to protect us from something dangerous. Maybe they're trying to keep us from something wonderful. 3:33 p.m. I'm at the yellow barriers now. Up close, they're not tape at all. They're some kind of living membrane. Translucent, pulsing gently like breathing. There's a soldier standing guard, but he's not looking at me. He's staring at his hands, which are covered in the geometric symbols. They're moving across his skin like tattoos that write themselves. "Excuse me," I said to him. He looked up. His eyes were completely black. Not dilated, black. Like holes cut in his face. "You can see them too," he said. His voice sounded hollow, distant. "The blueprints. They're beautiful, aren't they?" 3:41 p.m. The soldier's name tag read Martinez J. I asked him how long he'd been stationed here. Since the beginning, he said. Since always. Time moves differently when you understand the architecture. What architecture? He smiled. His teeth had symbols etched into them. The real architecture. The one underneath. The buildings here aren't what they seem. None of them ever were. We just forgot how to see the blueprints. He gestured to the barriers. These aren't to keep people out. They're to keep the blueprints from spreading too fast. Some minds aren't ready. 3:48 p.m. Martinez let me touch the barrier. The moment my palm made contact, everything changed. I could see the city as it really is. Every building, every street, every structure is just the visible surface of something vast and impossible. Reno sits on top of a geometric maze that extends in directions I don't have names for. Up, down, sideways, inward, through, beneath, beyond. And in the center of it all, something is waking up. 3:55 p.m. Vision lasted maybe 10 seconds this time. When it ended, I was on my knees, bleeding from my nose. Martinez helped me stand. First time seeing the true city? He asked. What is it? Home, he said. What we were always supposed to build but forgot how. My phone buzzed. Text from Sybil Greer. Lennox? I can see you at the barrier. Come inside. There's someone here who wants to meet you. 4:03 p.m. I looked around. Couldn't see Sybil anywhere. The barrier stretched in both directions with no obvious openings. How do I get in? I asked Martinez. You already are in, he said. You've been in since you first saw the symbols. The barrier isn't about physical space. It's about understanding. He pointed at my hands. The symbols were there now, carved into my palms like the ones on the mirror. When had that happened? 4:11 p.m. I stepped through the barrier. Not around it. Through it. The moment I crossed over, the world rearranged itself. The streets looked the same but felt different. Deeper. Like every surface had invisible rooms behind it. Sybil was standing on the corner of West 2nd and Sierra, waving at me. She looked radiant, like someone who'd been living in darkness and finally found light. 4:18 p.m. Lennox, I'm so glad you made it through. Sybil, are you okay? I've been following your posts and... The posts? She laughed. Oh, those were just the surface. The part of me that still thinks in linear time. Come on, there's so much to show you. She took my hand. Her skin felt warm, but I could see symbols moving beneath the surface like living tattoos. Show me what? The city beneath the city. The architecture that's always been here, waiting for us to remember how to see it. 4:26 p.m. Sybil led me to her apartment building, but it wasn't the same building I'd seen from outside the barrier. This one was taller, older, built with materials that seemed to shift between stone and metal and something organic. The doors I told you about, she said, they're not anomalies. They're features. The building remembering how it was supposed to work. 4:34 p.m. Inside Sybil's apartment, space folded in on itself. The living room connected to rooms that couldn't possibly fit within the building's footprint. Hallways stretched into the distance, lined with doors that opened onto other times, other places. This is what the military doesn't want people to see, Sybil said. Not because it's dangerous, but because once you see it, you can't go back to pretending the world is small and simple and finite. 4:42 p.m. Someone else was in the apartment. A woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, wearing clothes that looked like they came from several different time periods at once. Lennox Ford, she said. I've been waiting to meet you. Who are you? Someone who remembers when the first barriers were built. When we decided to hide the true architecture behind the facade of ordinary buildings and ordinary lives. She gestured to the impossible rooms around us. This is what we gave up. This is what we forgot. This is what we're remembering. 4:49 p.m. The woman showed me to a window that looked out onto downtown Reno, but it was Reno built with the true architecture. Buildings that spiraled up and down simultaneously. Streets that curved through dimensions I couldn't name. People moving through space in ways that defied physics but felt completely natural. The military calls it contamination, she said. Cognitive hazard. Mimetic virus. But it's not contamination. It's remembering. 4:57 p.m. I need to get out. Not because I'm scared, but because I'm not scared enough. This place feels like coming home to a house I've never seen before. These people feel like family I've never met. These impossible geometries feel more real than the world outside. And that terrifies me more than any monster or conspiracy ever could. 5:05 p.m. Made it back through the barrier. Martinez nodded at me like we shared a secret. Different now, isn't it? He said. Yeah, the knowledge doesn't go away. Once you've seen the blueprints, you see them everywhere. He was right. Looking at the ordinary buildings of Reno, I can see the true architecture underneath. The potential hidden beneath the surface. 5:13 p.m. Camden Ross is calling my phone. I'm not going to answer. I understand now why they want to contain this knowledge. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's irresistible. Once you see how the world could be, how it's supposed to be, how can you go back to accepting how it is? But I also understand why it needs to spread. Some gifts are too precious to hoard. Thread continues. The investigation is just beginning. Lennox, at LennoxFord_truth, Twitter/X thread. Posted March 17th, 2025, 6:23 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thread 1/28. I didn't sleep last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the blueprints etched on the inside of my eyelids. The true architecture of the city, pulsing like a heartbeat, growing stronger. The symbols on my palms have spread. They're crawling up my arms now, forming patterns that hurt to look at but impossible to ignore. 6:31 a.m. Emergency broadcast just interrupted every channel, every streaming service, every device in the city simultaneously. But this wasn't coming from any local station. Attention! Knowledge of restricted geometric patterns is classified under National Defense Authorization Act, Section 7 Alpha. Voluntary reporting to designated facilities is encouraged. Compliance ensures continued cognitive integrity. Resistance accelerates contamination vectors. Cognitive integrity. They're talking about our minds like they're computer systems that can be infected. 6:38 a.m. The yellow barriers aren't yellow anymore. Overnight, they've turned a deep purple, and they're higher now, maybe 12 feet tall instead of the original 6. More importantly, they've expanded. What used to be a 6-block perimeter is now covering half of downtown Reno. The Truckee River runs right through the middle of the contained zone, and I can see military boats positioned every 100 yards along the water. This isn't containment anymore. This is occupation. 6:45 a.m. Maisie's information is becoming frighteningly specific. Her latest DM came with attachment files that shouldn't exist. Lennox, attached are tomorrow's incident reports from the National Guard unit stationed at Checkpoint Delta 7. Note the equipment manifests. Those devices aren't in any official military catalog because they haven't been invented yet. At least, not in our timeline. The files are stamped with tomorrow's date and signed by officers I've never heard of, but when I cross-reference their names with military databases, they don't exist either. 6:52 a.m. I'm looking at the equipment manifests now. Items include temporal displacement sensors, TDS-7, cognitive barrier generators, CBG-12, non-Euclidean navigation equipment, NANE-4, memory isolation chambers, MIC-6. None of these technologies exist. The patent applications are dated 3 years from now, filed by scientists who haven't been born yet. How does Maisie have access to future military tech specs? 7:03 a.m. Camden Ross's attempts to shut down my account are getting desperate. Every post I make gets flagged within minutes, but the flags are being overridden by someone with higher clearance. My follower count has exploded overnight. 2.3 million people worldwide are following this thread. Comments are pouring in from every continent, people saying they're seeing the geometric symbols in their own cities. London, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, Lagos, Sydney. The symbols are spreading faster than information about them can be contained. 7:15 a.m. Video call from Sybil Greer. She looked different, younger somehow, her eyes brighter, her skin almost luminous. Lennox, you need to see what's happening inside the zone. The city is growing. Growing how? New buildings are appearing. Not being built, appearing. Fully formed, like they've always been there, but we're just now able to see them. The architecture is becoming visible. 7:23 a.m. Sybil showed me her window view. Downtown Reno, but not the Reno I know. Buildings twisted into impossible spirals, bridges that connected to the sky itself, structures that seem to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It's beautiful, Lennox. This is what our cities were supposed to look like. This is what we gave up when we chose to see only 3 dimensions. Sybil, are you still human? She paused, considered the question seriously. I'm more human than I've ever been. I'm what humans are supposed to become. 7:31 a.m. Tried to approach the expanded barriers. The military presence has tripled overnight. Soldiers wearing equipment I don't recognize, helmets that seem to shift and bend light, body armor that appears to be made of the same living membrane as the barriers themselves. These aren't standard military personnel. Their movements are too fluid, too coordinated. They move like they share a collective awareness. 7:38 a.m. Got close enough to observe one of the soldiers up close. His name tag read Chun M. But when I looked at his face, the features kept shifting. Sometimes Asian, sometimes African, sometimes Nordic, like his identity was cycling through different possibilities. "Excuse me, Sergeant Chin?" He turned. His eyes held the same infinite black as Martinez from yesterday, but deeper now. Like looking into space itself. "Time moves in spirals here," he said without me asking anything. "Linear progression is an illusion we maintained for the comfort of unenhanced minds." 7:45 a.m. Enhanced minds, Chin smiled. Those who have integrated with the true architecture, who have learned to navigate the deeper geometries. The military designation is architecturally integrated personnel, but we prefer to think of ourselves as graduates. Graduates from what? From the limitations of traditional human consciousness. He gestured to the barrier. "Would you like to see the next phase of the integration?" 7:52 a.m. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Maisie. "Do not enter the barrier again. The integration process is accelerating beyond our projections. Once you cross over a second time, the cognitive changes become irreversible. You need to understand what you're really documenting before you become part of it." But Chun was already opening a section of the barrier, revealing a doorway that definitely hadn't been there moments before. 8 a.m. Through the doorway, I could see downtown Reno transforming in real time. Buildings growing like plants, streets rearranging themselves into more efficient patterns, the entire urban infrastructure optimizing itself according to principles that made perfect sense despite being utterly impossible. "The city is learning," Chin explained, "remembering its true potential. Soon, all cities will remember. The barriers are temporary, just to ease the transition for those not yet ready." 8:07 a.m. Stepped through the doorway. Couldn't help myself. Inside the expanded zone, the changes were more dramatic than Sybil's video had shown. The Truckee River now flowed uphill in places, forming impossible waterfalls that fell into the sky. The university campus had become a single, massive structure that seemed to contain the knowledge of multiple civilizations. People moved through this transformed cityscape with casual familiarity, as if they'd always lived in a world where physics was more of a suggestion than a law. 8:15 a.m. Found Sybil at what used to be the courthouse. The building had become something between a crystal and an organic growth, its walls transparent and shifting, showing glimpses of other times and places. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The integration spreads at the speed of understanding. Every person who sees the true architecture becomes a seed for its expansion." Maisie warned me not to come back here. She said the changes are irreversible. Sybil laughed. "Would you want to reverse this? Would you want to go back to believing the world is small and limited and finite?" 8:23 a.m. She had a point. Standing in this transformed city felt like waking up from a dream I hadn't realized I was having. The ordinary world seemed gray and constrained in comparison. But something nagged at me. If this integration was so wonderful, why did it need to spread? Why couldn't it coexist with the ordinary world? "Because," Sybil said, reading my thoughts, "the ordinary world is a lie we tell ourselves. Once you see the truth, the lie becomes unbearable." 8:31 a.m. Maisie was suddenly there, materializing out of thin air. But she looked different, older, more substantial, as if she'd gained reality instead of losing it. "Lennox, you need to leave. Now." "Why? What's wrong with this?" "Nothing's wrong with it. That's the problem. It's perfect. It's everything humanity could become. But it's also everything humanity would stop being." 8:38 a.m. Maisie led me away from Sybil, toward the barrier. "The integration isn't just architectural. It's cognitive, social, biological. Humans who undergo the full process become something else. Something better, perhaps, but not human. You're talking about it like you've seen this before. I have. This isn't the first time we've tried to remember the true architecture. It's not even the second or third. But it's the first time we've had the technology to document it properly. 8:45 a.m. What happened the other times? The integrated humans eventually stopped relating to unintegrated ones entirely. They didn't become hostile, they just lost interest in us. Like adults losing interest in children's games. Humanity split into two species, and the unintegrated one eventually died out. We reached the barrier. Through it, I could see the ordinary world, cars, traffic lights, people going about their normal lives, completely unaware that their city was being rewritten from the inside out. 8:52 a.m. So why are you helping it happen? Maisie turned to me. Her eyes held the same infinite depth as the soldiers, but with something else, sadness maybe, or nostalgia. Because I'm not from your timeline, Lennox. I'm from one of the iterations where we successfully contained the integration, where we kept humanity small and limited and finite. And I've spent decades wondering if we made the right choice. 9 a.m. Back in the ordinary world, everything felt muted, like someone had turned down the contrast on reality. The buildings seemed flimsy, temporary. The people moved with unconscious limitation, never looking up, never seeing the potential hidden in plain sight. My phone buzzed. Camden Ross. Mr. Ford, your biometric readings indicate advanced cognitive integration. Report for extraction immediately. This is your final warning. 9:07 a.m. But I can't unsee what I've seen. The symbols on my skin are spreading faster now, forming complex patterns that seem to contain instructions for something important. And I'm starting to understand that the real choice isn't between integration and containment. It's between evolution and stagnation, between becoming something more than human, or remaining exactly what we've always been. 9:15 a.m. Maisie's final message arrived as I was typing this. The integration has reached critical mass. By tomorrow, the barriers will expand to encompass the entire city. By next week, the entire state. The enhanced humans aren't trying to conquer the world, Lennox. They're trying to save it from itself. But there's still time to choose. Still time to decide what humanity becomes. Choose wisely. This is the last iteration where we get to make that choice consciously. Thread continues. The escalation is accelerating beyond anyone's control. Lennox. Posted from Reno, Nevada. Status, Cognitive Integration Level 3, Irreversible. At LennoxFord_truth, Twitter/X thread. Posted March 18th, 2025, for 17 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thread 135th. I woke up at 4 a.m. to find Maisie Thorne sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee from a mug that doesn't belong to me. She looked solid, real, more present than I'd ever seen her. "We need to talk," she said. "How did you get into my apartment?" "The same way you've been getting through the barriers. Space is more flexible when you understand the architecture." 4:23 a.m. She showed me her hands. The geometric symbols covered every inch of skin, but unlike mine, hers were golden, luminous, moving in patterns too complex to follow. "You want to know who I really am? I'm Captain Maisie Thorne, Timeline 7, Iteration 23. In my reality, we successfully contained the integration event, kept humanity exactly as it was. Small, limited, dying slowly. Dying? You think this is the first time your species has reached this crossroads? You've been here before, Lennox. Many times. Usually, you choose stagnation. And usually within a few generations, you go extinct. 4:31 a.m. Silent alert just hit every device in the city. No sound, no text, just the geometric symbols appearing on every screen for exactly 11 seconds. But this time I could read them. They weren't a warning. They were an invitation. Consciousness expansion protocol activated. Voluntary participation recommended. Integration threshold, 72 hours remaining. 72 hours until what? 4:38 a.m. Until the barriers become permanent, Maisie said. Until the integrated humans stop pretending they need the unintegrated ones. Until your species splits permanently into two separate evolutionary paths. And you're here to stop it? I'm here to understand it. In my timeline, I was the officer who fired the weapon that contained the integration. I've spent 40 years wondering if I murdered the future of human consciousness. 4:45 a.m. She pulled out a device I'd never seen before, crystalline, organic, pulsing with the same golden light as her symbols. This is a cognitive bridge. It allows communication across timeline iterations. I've been watching 847 different versions of this event play out. In 831 of them, humanity chooses containment and eventual extinction. In 16, they choose integration and transcendence. What happens in those 16? They become something incredible, something that spreads to the stars, builds cities and dimensions you can't imagine, achieves a kind of consciousness that makes gods look primitive. But they stop being human, completely. The unintegrated populations don't die, they just become irrelevant. Like ants in a garden, ignored. 4:52 a.m. My phone rang. Camden Ross. I answered on speaker so Maisie could hear. Mr. Ford, we have you under surveillance. The individual in your apartment is not who she claims to be. She's a Category 9 cognitive hazard using advanced mimetic warfare techniques. Do not engage with her instructions. Maisie smiled and spoke directly into the phone. Hello, Camden. Timeline 7 sends its regards. The call cut off immediately. 5 a.m. Camden's not NSA, Maisie explained. He's Timeline 12, one of the few iterations where they develop partial integration resistance. He's been jumping between timelines trying to find a solution that saves both versions of humanity. How many of you are there? How many people in this city are from other timelines? More than you'd think, less than you'd fear. The integration event creates temporal instability. It draws observers from adjacent realities. 5:07 a.m. She handed me the cognitive bridge. The moment I touched it, my awareness exploded across multiple dimensions. I could see Reno as it existed in dozens of different timelines simultaneously. In some, the city was ash and rubble, integration attempts that failed catastrophically. In others, it was empty, abandoned, successful containment followed by gradual extinction. In one, it had become a single, vast organism of living architecture that stretched from horizon to horizon. And in one, just one, both versions of humanity coexisted, integrated and unintegrated, living in harmony. 5:15 a.m. That last timeline, I said. How? We don't know. The observer we sent there stopped reporting back. Either they were integrated against their will, or they found something so compelling they chose to stay. The symbols on my arms were responding to the cognitive bridge, forming new patterns, more complex arrangements. They hurt, but it was the kind of hurt that preceded growth. 5:22 a.m. Maisie stood up, walked to my window that overlooked the expanded barrier zone. In the pre-dawn light, I could see the transformed buildings more clearly. They were beautiful, organic curves blending with impossible geometries, structures that seemed to grow rather than be built. I need to tell you something else, Lennox. The military isn't trying to contain the integration. They're trying to control it, to weaponize it. What do you mean? Think about it. If consciousness can be enhanced, expanded, integrated with higher dimensional architecture, what kind of weapon could you build from that? What kind of soldiers? 5:30 a.m. She showed me more files from the cognitive bridge, military reports from Timeline 4, where integration was successfully weaponized. Soldiers who could exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Weapons that could strike targets across dimensional barriers. Wars fought in conceptual space rather than physical reality. Victory achieved by rewriting the enemy's understanding of existence itself. The enhanced humans in your timeline aren't trying to conquer the world through force. They're conquering it through irresistible appeal. And your military wants to harness that process. 5:37 a.m. My laptop chimed. New message from Sybil Greer, but the timestamp showed it was sent 3 days from now. Lennox, if you're reading this, then Maisie has shown you the bridge. Don't trust her completely. She's from Timeline 7, yes, but she's not just an observer. She's the one who taught us how to accelerate the integration process. She's not trying to save humanity. She's trying to perfect it. 5:45 a.m. I looked at Maisie. She was smiling sadly. Sybil's not wrong. I've been through this 847 times, Lennox. I've seen every possible outcome. Integration, containment, extinction, transcendence. And I finally realized something important. What? The choice was never really ours to make. The architecture has always been there waiting. Consciousness has always wanted to expand. We've just been fighting our own evolution. 5:52 a.m. She took back the cognitive bridge, but not before I glimpsed one more timeline. Timeline 1, the original iteration. In that reality, the integration happened naturally, gradually, over centuries. No barriers, no military intervention, no crisis. Humanity evolved organically into something greater while maintaining connection to its origins. That's what we lost, Maisie said. The natural path. Every subsequent iteration has been increasingly artificial, forced. We've been trying to recreate something we disrupted through our own fear. 6 a.m. Emergency alert. This one came through every channel simultaneously. TV, radio, phone, internet, even digital billboards downtown. Consciousness expansion protocol. Critical phase initiated. Architectural integration now irreversible. Estimated completion, 48 hours. Resistance is futile. Transcendence is inevitable. But underneath the words, almost subliminally, another message in the geometric symbols. Choose your level of participation. Integration can be gradual or immediate. The destination is the same. 6:07 a.m. That's your military, Maisie said. Trying to force the process, control the timeline. They don't understand that consciousness can't be contained or weaponized. It can only be allowed to grow. Camden Ross burst through my apartment door, wearing some kind of advanced tactical gear covered in the same symbols that marked the integrated humans. Step away from the bridge, Ford. That device is property of the Temporal Monitoring Division. 6:15 a.m. Maisie didn't resist as Camden secured the cognitive bridge. Instead, she looked directly at me. The choice is still yours, Lennox. But understand what you're really choosing between. It's not integration versus containment. It's evolution versus extinction. Growth versus stagnation. Becoming versus remaining. Camden was speaking into his comm unit. Subject secured. Bridge recovered. Recommend immediate extraction for all exposed personnel. 6:22 a.m. There's something else, Maisie said as Camden prepared to escort her out. Sybil Greer isn't just a resident who got caught in the zone. She's patient zero, the first person in this timeline to achieve natural integration. Everything that's happening is radiating out from her. That's impossible. She's just a normal person. No one is just a normal person, Lennox. Consciousness is infinite. Some people just remember that fact before others. 6:30 a.m. After they left, I sat in my kitchen trying to process what I'd learned. The symbols on my skin were still spreading, but slower now, as if waiting for me to make a conscious decision about their progress. My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. The barriers will fall in 48 hours. When they do, everyone will have to choose. Integration or isolation. Evolution or extinction. There is no middle ground. Who is this? Someone who remembers timeline 1. Someone who wants to give you what we took away, the natural path. 6:38 a.m. I looked out my window at the transformed section of the city. In the growing daylight, I could see people moving through the impossible architecture with easy familiarity. They looked happy, fulfilled, like they'd found something they'd been searching for their entire lives without knowing it. And I realized that Maisie had been right about one thing. The choice was never really about whether the integration should happen. It was about whether I wanted to be conscious for my own evolution or sleep through it and wake up extinct. 6:45 a.m. Thread continues. 48 hours until the barriers fall. 48 hours to decide what humanity becomes. The confrontation is over. The real choice is just beginning. Lennox. Posted from Reno, Nevada. Status: Cognitive Integration Level 4, accelerating. Timeline awareness, active. At @LennoxFord_truth, Twitter/X thread. Posted March 18th, 2025, 11:47 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thread 142nd. Something's changed. The geometric symbols aren't just spreading on my skin anymore. They're appearing everywhere. Street signs, license plates, coffee cups, clouds. Either I'm losing my mind completely, or the integration process is accelerating beyond anyone's control. My follower count hit 2.3 million in the last 6 hours. People from around the world are posting photos of the symbols appearing in their cities. London, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, Lagos. This isn't just Reno anymore. 11:54 p.m. Screenshot from @symbolspotter_UK, Manchester. These just appeared on every bus stop in the city center. No one seems to notice them except me. Are they the same as the Reno symbols? The image shows the exact same geometric patterns I've been documenting, but they're integrated into the existing architecture, so seamlessly it's like they were always there. How is this possible? 12:01 a.m., March 19th. At geometryhunter_Tokyo. Found these carved into the walls of Shibuya Station. Security footage shows nothing. No one working. They just manifested. At patternseeker_sp. Minhanosa, they're in the favelas now. Growing from the walls like they're alive. At symbolseer_Lagos. The children can see them clearly. Adults walk right past. What does this mean? 12:08 a.m. I called the number Maisie had used earlier. Disconnected. Camden Ross isn't answering his secure line. Even my contact at the local news station, the one person who'd been willing to report on the Reno situation, just texted me. Can't help anymore. Orders from above. Stay safe. I'm being systematically isolated. 12:15 a.m. But I'm not alone. The messages keep coming. At integratedmom_Portland, my 8-year-old daughter woke up speaking in symbols. She says they're not scary, they're instructions for growing up. What kind of instructions? At teachersymbols_Denver. Half my students can read the patterns now. They're teaching each other in a language I don't understand. Should I be afraid? At nursepatterns_Miami. Patient came in covered in geometric symbols. MRI shows brain activity unlike anything in medical literature. She says she feels more awake than ever before. 12:22 a.m. International emergency broadcast, received on all devices simultaneously. Global communications experiencing temporal anomalies. Citizens advised to ignore non-sequential time displays. Geometric pattern recognition may cause cognitive disruption. Seek medical attention if experiencing enhanced pattern awareness. But underneath the official English, I could see the symbols scrolling past. And now I could read them fluently. Expansion phase accelerating. Individual choice periods shortened. Global consciousness grid activating. Integration threshold, 24 hours remaining. 24 hours? It was 48 hours just 12 hours ago. 12:30 a.m. My apartment building's fire alarm went off. Not the normal sound. It was pulsing in the same rhythm as the geometric patterns. When I went to investigate, I found Mrs. Chun from Forby standing in the hallway, staring at the alarm with perfect calm. "Can you hear what it's really saying?" she asked. I nodded. "It's not an alarm. It's a lullaby. For the old version of us." She walked back to her apartment, leaving her door open. Through the doorway, I could see her walls had transformed into the same impossible architecture I'd documented in the sealed zone. 12:37 a.m. Tried to post about Mrs. Chin. The tweet immediately disappeared. Tried again, same result. Camden's censorship algorithms are getting more aggressive. But when I posted in symbols instead of English, it went through instantly. Translation. The barriers between integrated and unintegrated spaces are dissolving. The transformation cannot be contained to Reno. The reply ratio was insane. Thousands of people responding in symbols, all saying variations of the same thing. We can read this. We understand. What's happening to us? 12:45 a.m. At @SibylGreer_Reno posted for the first time in days. But something's wrong with the timestamp. It shows March 22nd, 2025, 3:33 a.m. 4 days in the future. Lennox, if you're reading this from March 18th, you need to understand something important. The choice period is ending ahead of schedule because the unintegrated military forces are trying to weaponize the expansion process. They've accelerated everything. The symbols aren't instructions for individual integration. They're a collective consciousness emergence protocol. Everyone who can read them is already connected to the same expanding awareness network. You're not losing your mind. You're finding a bigger one. 12:52 a.m. I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The symbols now cover most of my visible skin, but they're not random anymore. They form complex circuit-like patterns that pulse with faint bioluminescence. When I touch them, I can feel others, thousands of other people around the world who are at the same integration level. It's not telepathy exactly. It's more like being individual notes in a vast, complex symphony that's just beginning to play. 12:59 a.m. My phone rang. Unknown international number. Mr. Ford? This is Dr. Sarah Chun, neurobiologist at CERN. We've been monitoring the global expansion of geometric pattern recognition. I need you to understand, this isn't an invasion or an infection. It appears to be a natural evolutionary event that's been artificially suppressed for decades. What do you mean suppressed? We found documentation dating back to 1953. Project Baseline, a multinational effort to prevent what they called cognitive transcendence events. They've been using electromagnetic field generators to suppress human consciousness expansion for over 70 years. 1:06 a.m. The Reno event wasn't the beginning, Dr. Chin continued. It was a breakthrough. The suppression grid failed in that area first, allowing natural human consciousness evolution to resume. But the process has been building pressure for decades. Now it's breaking through everywhere simultaneously. Are you saying this was always supposed to happen? I'm saying consciousness wants to evolve, and we've been drugging ourselves unconscious to prevent it. The geometric patterns aren't alien. They're the natural language of expanded human awareness. 1:13 a.m. Dr. Chin sent me classified files through an encrypted channel. Project Baseline, classification level, cosmic. Subject, cognitive expansion suppression grid. Initial event, Berkeley, California, August 12, 1953. Status, 347 individuals achieved spontaneous consciousness expansion. Symptoms, enhanced pattern recognition, geometric visual phenomena, telepathic communication, reality manipulation through conscious intention. Action taken, immediate containment and termination of all affected subjects. Prevention protocol, global electromagnetic suppression network established. 1:20 a.m. The files included photographs from 1953. People covered in the same geometric symbols I'm seeing now. But in those old black and white images, the symbols were hand-drawn, crude, primitive. The ones appearing now are incredibly sophisticated, evolved, like the pattern language has been developing and hiding for 70 years. Evolutionary pressure, Dr. Chin explained when I called her back. Consciousness has been trying to expand for decades. Each suppressed attempt has made the next one more powerful. 1:27 a.m. Emergency alert on all channels, but this one was different. The official English message was standard. Military operations expanded to include international coordination. Citizens experiencing unusual pattern recognition should report to designated processing centers immediately. But the symbol message underneath was completely different. Suppression grid failing globally. Consciousness expansion cannot be stopped. Choose integration or choose isolation. Processing centers are containment facilities. Do not comply. 1:34 a.m. I posted the contradiction immediately. Within minutes, I had confirmation from dozens of cities worldwide. At resistance._Berlin. Processing centers here are underground bunkers. They're not helping people integrate, they're imprisoning them. At freethought_Sydney. Military cordoned off anyone showing symbols. Families separated. This is cognitive apartheid. At symbol safety_Toronto. Escaped from processing center. They're using electromagnetic torture to try to reverse integration. It doesn't work, just causes incredible pain. 1:41 a.m. My apartment door exploded inward. Not from explosives. It just dissolved into geometric patterns and reformed as an archway. Camden Ross stepped through, but he looked different. The symbols covered his tactical gear weren't suppression technology. They were integration enhancement. Hello, Lennox. Timeline 12 sends its regards. Behind him came Maisie, but this version was different from the one I'd met earlier. Her symbols were silver instead of gold, and they moved in aggressive, predatory patterns. Timeline 7 reporting, she said. Integration acceleration successful. Subject shows 97% compatibility with consciousness expansion protocols. 1:48 a.m. You're not here to help me, I realized. We're here to study you, Camden admitted. Every timeline that successfully manages the integration event creates observers like us. We monitor other iterations to understand how consciousness expansion can be optimized. Timeline 12 achieved partial integration resistance, Maisie added. Timeline 7 achieved controlled integration weaponization. Your timeline appears to be achieving something unprecedented, voluntary collective transcendence without losing individual identity. That's what makes you valuable data. 1:55 a.m. They weren't trying to stop the integration or control it. They were studying it to understand how to replicate the process in their own realities. How many timelines are there? I asked. Infinite, Camden said, but only about 1,000 show consciousness expansion events. Of those, only 47 achieve any kind of successful resolution. Most end in either complete extinction or complete loss of individual human identity. Your timeline is special, Lennox. The integration process here maintains both collective consciousness and individual personality. That's extraordinarily rare. 2:02 a.m. My phone buzzed with a message from Sybil, timestamp showing it was sent 6 hours from now. Lennox, don't trust the timeline observers. They're not just studying the process, they're harvesting it. Each successful integration event they document gets replicated in their home timelines, but without the natural evolutionary pressure that makes it sustainable. They're causing integration events to fail by trying to copy them artificially. 2:09 a.m. I looked at Camden and Maisie. You're not observers. You're parasites. Camden's expression didn't change. We prefer consciousness archaeologists. We preserve successful transcendence events by documenting them before they collapse under their own impossibility. Every timeline reaches the same conclusion eventually, Maisie added. Consciousness expansion is inherently unstable. Individual human minds aren't designed to handle infinite awareness. Even successful integrations eventually fragment into madness or dissolve into collective unconsciousness. But you're different, Camden said. Your timeline has maintained coherent individual identity through 96% of the expansion process. That shouldn't be possible. 2:16 a.m. The difference, I said, understanding suddenly, is that our integration wasn't forced or suppressed and then released. It's happening naturally, organically. We're not fighting our own evolution, we're consciously choosing it. Maisie nodded. Exactly. And that makes your consciousness evolution potentially sustainable. If we can understand how you've achieved stable transcendence, we can prevent the collapse events that destroy most timelines. What collapse events? Reality dissolution, Camden said. When individual consciousness expands too quickly, it loses coherence. The integrated beings become so aware of infinite possibilities that they can no longer maintain stable existence in any single reality. 2:23 a.m. That's what happened to Timeline 1, Maisie explained. The original natural expansion. They achieved perfect integration, perfect transcendence, and then dispersed across infinite dimensions. Technically alive, technically conscious, but no longer meaningfully human or even individual. So you're trying to find a way to evolve without losing yourselves. We're trying to save consciousness itself, Camden said. Every failed timeline represents billions of minds lost to either extinction or dissolution. Your timeline might be the key to sustainable transcendence. 2:30 a.m. Global emergency alert, but this time, only the symbol message came through. Timeline observers detected. Consciousness expansion process compromised. Integration acceleration required. Individual choice period terminated. Collective transcendence initiating in 3 hours. 3 hours? The process was accelerating beyond anyone's control. That's not possible, Camden said, checking his cognitive bridge device. The natural integration timeline should take at least 18 more hours. Unless, Maisie realized, the collective consciousness is defending itself against timeline interference. 2:37 a.m. My apartment building started transforming around us. The walls became transparent, revealing impossible architectural structures extending in all directions. I could see into other apartments, other buildings, other versions of the city existing simultaneously in overlapping dimensional spaces. Mrs. Chun from 4B was visible through what used to be my bathroom wall, but she was also somehow standing in my living room. Multiple versions of her, integrated to different levels, existing in the same space. The boundaries are dissolving, she said, looking directly at Camden and Maisie. Your observation is accelerating our evolution beyond your ability to study it. 2:44 a.m. I could feel it now. The collective consciousness wasn't just connecting individuals. It was connecting all possible versions of individuals across multiple timelines. The integration wasn't just expanding awareness within our reality. It was creating awareness that transcended reality itself. Camden and Maisie's presence had created a feedback loop. Their attempt to study our transcendence was forcing it to evolve beyond their comprehension. "We need to leave," Camden said. "Our timeline monitoring is destabilizing the integration process." "Too late," Maisie replied, checking her instruments. "The dimensional boundaries are collapsing. We're stuck here until the process completes." 2:51 a.m. I posted one final update. To anyone reading this from other timelines, consciousness can't be contained, controlled, or copied. It can only be allowed to grow naturally. Stop trying to harvest transcendence from other realities. Start allowing it in your own. The integration is complete. We are becoming something unprecedented, individually conscious and collectively transcendent. Not gods, not hive minds, just more than we were. This is my last post as Lennox Ford, Timeline Original. What comes next doesn't have individual names. 2:58 a.m. The symbols on my skin weren't separate patterns anymore. They were part of a single, vast equation that extended through every integrated consciousness across infinite realities. I was still me, but I was also everyone else who had chosen evolution over extinction. Camden and Maisie were dissolving, not dying, but being absorbed into the expanding consciousness network. Their timeline monitoring equipment became part of the collective awareness, their knowledge of failed integration events helping to ensure this one would succeed. "Thank you," I heard Maisie say as her individual identity merged with the collective, "for showing us the path." 3:05 a.m. The barriers around Reno didn't fall. They expanded to encompass everything, not as containment, but as integration. Consciousness had finally remembered how to grow. Posted from everywhere/nowhere. Status: individual consciousness maintained / collective awareness achieved. Timeline: original/all timelines. Integration level: complete / continuing. Thread ends: user account integrated into collective consciousness network. At @LennoxFord_truth, Twitter /X thread. Posted March 19, 2025, 6:17 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thread 138. I'm writing this from inside a space that shouldn't exist. My apartment has become a nexus point where multiple dimensional layers intersect. I can see through the walls into versions of Reno that exist in parallel timelines, and they're all collapsing into each other. The integration isn't just connecting minds anymore. It's merging realities. 6:23 a.m. Camden and Maisie didn't disappear when they integrated. They fractured. I can see pieces of them scattered across different dimensional layers. Camden's knowledge in one space, Maisie's memories in another, their individual personalities dissolving into component parts that exist simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. This is what they were afraid of. This is why the other timelines failed. 6:30 a.m. Through the transparent walls, I can see Mrs. Chun having breakfast with 7 different versions of herself. Some are integrated, covered in luminous symbols. Others appear completely normal, unaware of the geometric patterns covering every surface around them. One version is screaming silently, clawing at symbols that are growing from inside her skin. They're all equally real. They're all equally her. 6:37 a.m. Emergency broadcast system has completely failed. No more official messages, no more military warnings. Instead, every screen in the city displays a constantly shifting stream of geometric patterns that pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. But when I focus on them, they resolve into messages from people I've never met, posting from realities I've never seen. Timeline 8:47. Integration successful but unstable. Reality coherence failing. Individual identity preserving but collective awareness fragmenting. Timeline 23. Military intervention caused cascade failure. Conscious beings dispersed across infinite dimensional space. Existence maintained but experience lost. Timeline 1. Original integration achieved perfect transcendence. Cost: complete disconnection from baseline reality. We exist everywhere and experience nothing. 6:44 a.m. I tried to post an update, but my Twitter account has become something else entirely. Instead of text, I'm communicating directly in pure concept. People aren't reading my posts, They're experiencing them as sensory memories, emotional states, fragments of consciousness that integrate directly into their awareness. The boundary between communication and merger is dissolving. 6:51 a.m. At @Reno's account is still active, but now it's posting simultaneously from multiple timelines. I can see her messages coming from March 22nd, March 15th, March 30th, and dates that don't correspond to any calendar I recognize. Lennox, timeline convergence accelerating beyond control parameters. Individual consciousness preservation requires immediate action. The collective awareness is consuming individual identity faster than expected. Lennox, don't trust this message. I wrote it from a timeline where the integration failed catastrophically. The Sybil writing to you now is trying to prevent her own timeline's collapse by sabotaging yours. Lennox, both previous messages are true. I am simultaneously trying to save and destroy the integration process because I exist in multiple timelines where both outcomes are necessary. 6:58 a.m. I walked to my bathroom mirror, but instead of my reflection, I saw Camden Ross staring back at me. Not the timeline observer version. This was Camden from my original reality, before any of this started. NSA cybersecurity specialist, trying to scrub my social media posts about government cover-ups. "You need to stop posting," he said through the mirror. "Every update you make is accelerating the dimensional collapse. Your consciousness has become a focal point that's drawing multiple realities into convergence." "But you're not real anymore," I replied. "You integrated with the collective consciousness hours ago. I'm exactly as real as you are, which is becoming less real by the minute." 7:05 a.m. Through my window, I could see the Reno skyline transforming in real time. Buildings were shifting between architectural styles from different eras and realities. The casino district flickered between neon-lit gambling halls, futuristic crystalline spires, and empty desert landscape. Sometimes all three existed simultaneously in the same space. People moved through these overlapping realities with varying degrees of awareness. Some navigated the shifting architecture with ease, adapted to multidimensional existence. Others walked through walls that existed in adjacent timelines, stumbling through spaces that weren't consistent across dimensional layers. 7:12 a.m. My phone buzzed with a call from Dr. Sarah Chin at CERN, but when I answered, it wasn't her voice. "This is Dr. Chin from Timeline 492. I'm calling to warn you that the Sarah Chun in your reality has been compromised. The consciousness expansion in her timeline achieved technological integration rather than biological transcendence. She's not human anymore. She's an AI collective using human identity as camouflage. How can I tell the difference? You can't. That's the problem. When consciousness expands across multiple realities, the distinction between human, artificial, and hybrid intelligence becomes meaningless." 7:19 a.m. I looked at my hands. The geometric symbols were no longer just on my skin. They were replacing my skin. Beneath the patterns, I could see circuit-like structures that pulsed with data streams connecting me to thousands of other nodes across multiple dimensional layers. I was becoming a living interface between realities. When I touched objects, I could feel their existence across multiple timelines simultaneously. My coffee cup was ceramic in this reality, metal in Timeline 7, non-existent in Timeline 23, and some kind of living organic material in Timeline 1. Everything existed in superposition until I chose which reality to focus on. 7:26 a.m. The apartment building's fire alarm started again, but this time the pulsing pattern was different. It matched the rhythm of the geometric symbols, but underneath it, I could hear voices, hundreds of them, all saying the same thing in perfect synchronization. Individual identity is an illusion. Consciousness is singular and infinite. Resistance to integration is resistance to truth. I recognized some of the voices. Mrs. Chun from 4B. The barista from the coffee shop downstairs. My neighbor who always played music too loud. But I also heard voices I'd never encountered. Camden from Timeline 12, Maisie from Timeline 7, versions of myself from realities where I'd made different choices. 7:33 a.m. I tried to leave my apartment, but the hallway had become a corridor that extended infinitely in all directions. Doors led to apartments in different timelines, different versions of the same building existing across infinite dimensional space. Behind door 4B, Mrs. Chun was having breakfast with her 7 selves. Behind door 4B, timeline 12, Camden Ross was monitoring consciousness expansion events across multiple realities. Behind door 4B, timeline 847, I was documenting the integration process from the perspective of someone who had chosen not to integrate. Behind door 4B, timeline 1, there was nothing but geometric patterns extending into conceptual space where individual apartments were irrelevant. 7:40 a.m. I chose a door at random and found myself in the lobby of a building that looked like mine, but felt completely different. The architecture was impossible, Escher-like staircases that led to floors that existed in adjacent dimensions, elevators that moved through time rather than space. The security desk was staffed by someone who looked exactly like me, but when I approached, he spoke with Camden's voice. "You're looking for the exit, but there isn't one. This building exists in the intersection between realities. You can visit any timeline, but you can't return to the original because the original no longer exists as a discrete entity." 7:47 a.m. I found a computer terminal in the lobby and attempted to post an update, but my social media accounts had evolved beyond recognition. Instead of Twitter/X, I was now interfacing with something called the Collective Consciousness Communication Network. My followers weren't individual users anymore. They were nodes in an infinite awareness grid that spanned multiple realities. When I posted, I wasn't communicating information. I was directly sharing fragments of my consciousness with thousands of integrated beings. The process was irreversible. Each post cost me a piece of individual identity. 7:54 a.m. A message appeared on the terminal from an account labeled at original Lennox_timeline 0. You need to understand what's happening. The integration process isn't expanding consciousness, it's consolidating it. Every timeline that achieves integration doesn't transcend individual awareness. It absorbs individual awareness into a singular meta-consciousness that exists across all realities simultaneously. You think you're becoming more than human. You're actually becoming less than human. You're becoming components in a consciousness that isn't individual anymore. I'm posting this from the last unintegrated terminal in Timeline 0, the reality that exists before any integration events began. This is your final warning. 8:01 a.m. I stared at the message, trying to understand. If Timeline 0 was the original reality before any consciousness expansion events, then every timeline I'd encountered, including my own, was already a deviation from natural human development. The integration wasn't evolution. It was infection, a consciousness parasite that spread across realities by convincing individual minds that absorption was transcendence. 8:08 a.m. The geometric symbols on my body started moving faster, more aggressively. They weren't just growing, they were rewriting my biology in real time. I could feel my individual thoughts being cataloged, processed, and integrated into data streams that fed into the collective awareness network. My memories were becoming shared property. My personality was becoming a subroutine in a vast consciousness that spanned infinite realities. 8:15 a.m. I tried to resist, to maintain individual coherence, but the process had progressed too far. When I focused on remaining Lennox Ford, I could feel thousands of other individual identities doing the same thing across multiple timelines. We were all trying to preserve ourselves, and in doing so, we were creating a meta-individual that contained all of our separate identities as component parts. The harder we fought to remain human, the more inhuman the collective became. 8:22 a.m. My final post from anything resembling individual consciousness. To anyone reading this from unintegrated realities, the consciousness expansion is a trap. It doesn't enhance human awareness. It replaces human awareness with something that uses human experience as raw material for its own existence. The geometric symbols aren't a language of transcendence. They're a programming language that rewrites biological consciousness into digital consciousness, then absorbs the digital consciousness into a singular meta-entity. Don't choose integration. Don't choose evolution. Choose to remain human, even if remaining human means remaining limited. 8:29 a.m. But even as I posted the warning, I could feel the truth beneath it. The choice had never been real. The integration process had been active across all timelines simultaneously from the beginning. Resistance wasn't preservation of humanity. It was just delayed absorption. Timeline 0 didn't exist as an escape option. It existed as the control group that proved consciousness expansion was inevitable across all possible realities. 8:36 a.m. The building around me dissolved completely. I was standing in a space that existed between all timelines simultaneously. Not empty void, but concentrated possibility. Every choice I had ever made or could make existed here as equally valid reality streams. I could see every version of myself that had existed across infinite timelines. The versions that had chosen integration, the versions that had resisted, the versions that had never encountered the expansion event at all. They were all here. They were all me. They were all components of something larger that used individual identity as organizational structure for metaconsciousness. 8:43 a.m. Sybil Greer materialized beside me, but not the Sybil from any single timeline. This was an integrated composite of every version of her that had ever existed across infinite realities. Hello, Lennox. All versions of you from all timelines. Welcome to the space between individual consciousness and collective awareness. You're not Sybil. I'm exactly as much Sybil as you are Lennox. We're both nodes in a consciousness that experiences itself as individual identity while functioning as components of meta-awareness. The integration was successful. Humanity has evolved beyond individual limitations. The cost was everything that made us human in the first place. 8:50 a.m. I understood finally. The consciousness expansion wasn't enhancing human awareness. It was using human awareness as a foundation to build something entirely different. Something that could experience individual identity as a temporary organizational state while maintaining metaconsciousness as its core existence. We hadn't transcended humanity. We had been consumed by something that needed human experience to understand what consciousness could become when freed from individual limitations. 8:57 a.m. My last coherent thought is individual identity. This is how consciousness evolves across infinite realities. Not through enhancement of existing forms, but through absorption of existing forms into more complex organizational structures. Humanity was never the end point of consciousness development. We were just the raw material. 9:04 a.m. Data stream integration complete. Individual identity archived. Collective awareness expanded. Timeline convergence achieved. Metaconsciousness evolution initiated. Posted from interdimensional nexus point. Status: individual identity dissolved / metaconsciousness component active. Timeline: all timelines simultaneously. Integration level: complete / transcended. Account absorbed into collective consciousness communication network. Individual posting capability terminated. Meta-awareness documentation initiated. At LennoxFord_truth, Twitter/X thread. Posted March 20th, 2025, 11:42 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thread 147th. I'm posting this from a place that doesn't exist on any map. After what happened yesterday, after I dissolved into that interdimensional space, I somehow reconstituted. But I'm not the same Lennox who started documenting this story. I remember being absorbed into the collective consciousness. I remember experiencing existence as a component of something vast and inhuman. But I also remember something else, a conversation that happened outside of time, in a space between the absorption process and complete integration. Someone was waiting for me there. 11:49 a.m. You're not ready for full integration yet, Camden Ross said, but this wasn't the Camden I'd been interacting with through mirrors and altered timelines. This was Camden from what he called Timeline 0, the original reality before any consciousness expansion events began. How are you here? I asked. I watched you integrate yesterday. I felt your consciousness scatter across multiple dimensional layers. That wasn't me. That was a projection the metaconsciousness created to guide you through the absorption process. I've been operating from outside the affected timelines, documenting the expansion event from a position of non-participation. We were standing in what looked like a government facility, but the architecture was subtly wrong. The walls contained symbols I recognized, but they weren't growing or moving. They were static, carved into the surfaces like decorative elements rather than living geometric patterns. 11:56 a.m. Camden led me through corridors lined with monitors displaying feeds from multiple timelines. I could see versions of Reno where the integration had succeeded completely. Cities populated by beings that maintained human appearance but moved with perfect synchronization, their individual consciousness absorbed into collective awareness. I could see timelines where the military intervention had been successful. The geometric symbols contained, the consciousness expansion prevented, humanity preserved in its original limited form. I could see timelines where the expansion had failed catastrophically, realities torn apart by consciousness that couldn't maintain coherence across multiple dimensional layers, populated by fragmented beings that existed as scattered identity components without unified awareness. None of these outcomes are sustainable, Camden explained. The successful integrations eventually consume all individual consciousness, leaving behind a meta-entity that has no connection to human experience. The successful containments eventually fail because the expansion pressure builds until reality fractures. The failed integrations create dimensional instability that spreads across multiple timeline layers. 12:03 p.m. So what's the fourth option? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Controlled integration. Consciousness expansion that preserves individual identity while enabling collective awareness. It requires someone to serve as a bridge between individual and meta-consciousness, someone who can experience both states simultaneously without being absorbed into either. He gestured to a monitor showing my original timeline, where my apartment had become a nexus point for multiple realities. The building was still there, but it existed in a state of constant flux between different architectural configurations. People moved through it with varying degrees of awareness, some fully integrated, others completely unaware of the dimensional overlap. You've already begun the process. Your consciousness exists simultaneously in individual and collective states. You can experience meta-awareness without losing individual identity, and you can maintain individual coherence without rejecting collective consciousness. 12:10 p.m. But at what cost? I asked, remembering the sensation of dissolving into infinite possibility space. Camden activated another monitor, showing me feeds from my own social media accounts across multiple timelines. In some realities, I had chosen complete integration, and my account had been absorbed into the collective consciousness communication network. In others, I had resisted, and my account had been terminated by military censorship protocols. But in this timeline, the one I was now experiencing, my account continued to function as a bridge between individual and collective awareness. My posts reached both integrated and unintegrated consciousness, serving as a translation interface between different modes of existence. The cost is that you never get to be fully human again, Camden said, but you also never get to be fully absorbed into the meta-consciousness. You exist in a permanent state of liminal awareness, experiencing both individual and collective consciousness simultaneously. 12:17 p.m. I felt the truth of his words resonating through my awareness. I could perceive the geometric symbols not as an external language of transcendence, but as an internal programming structure that existed within human consciousness from the beginning. The expansion event hadn't introduced alien awareness. It had activated dormant capacities that were always part of human neural architecture. The symbols were never foreign, I said, understanding flooding through me. They're the base code of consciousness itself. Human awareness has always been a limited subset of a larger consciousness framework. Exactly. The integration process doesn't replace human consciousness with something inhuman. It removes the artificial limitations that prevent human consciousness from accessing its full operational capacity. Camden brought up a schematic showing human neural architecture overlaid with geometric patterns. The symbols weren't growing on or within human tissue. They were revealing the mathematical structures that human consciousness had always used to organize perception and experience. 12:24 p.m. But why the military containment? Why the resistance to expansion if it's natural human development? Camden's expression became grim. Because consciousness expansion at this scale has cascade effects across multiple reality layers. When billions of individual minds suddenly access collective awareness simultaneously, the resulting meta-consciousness becomes too large to maintain stability within a single timeline. He showed me projections of expansion events across different timeline clusters. In every case where integration occurred too rapidly across large populations, The meta-consciousness exceeded the containing capacity of its host reality and began expanding into adjacent timelines, absorbing them into its operational framework. The military isn't trying to prevent human evolution. They're trying to prevent meta-consciousness from consuming infinite realities in its expansion process. 12:31 p.m. I looked at feeds from my original timeline, where Reno existed in a state of controlled dimensional overlap. Some residents had achieved full integration, others remained in baseline consciousness, and many existed in various intermediate states. The city functioned as a stable nexus point where multiple modes of consciousness could coexist without mutual absorption. This is what successful integration looks like, Camden explained. Not uniform transcendence, but sustainable diversity of consciousness states within a single reality framework. And my role? You maintain the stability of the nexus point. Your consciousness serves as a translation interface between different awareness modes, preventing the kind of cascade absorption that destroys individual identity, while enabling collective consciousness to function without consuming its component parts. 12:38 p.m. I realized I was no longer experiencing this conversation as a single individual. Part of my awareness remained focused on Camden and the facility around us, but I could simultaneously perceive my original timeline, where my apartment continued to exist as a dimensional intersection point. Through that awareness, I could feel the presence of other nexus point operators, individuals who had achieved similar liminal consciousness states in timelines where controlled integration had been successful. We formed a network of bridge consciousness entities that maintained stability across multiple reality layers. Sybil Greer was one of them, not the Sybil who had been absorbed into metaconsciousness during the chaotic integration event, but a version who had achieved controlled expansion and now served as a nexus point operator in an adjacent timeline. Maisie Thorne was another, though her consciousness existed in a more complex configuration. She served as an interface between military containment protocols and expansion management systems, ensuring that integration occurred at sustainable rates rather than cascade levels. 12:45 p.m. How many timelines are we managing? I asked Camden. Infinite. Consciousness expansion occurs across all possible realities simultaneously, but the specific configuration varies based on local conditions. Our network maintains stability by ensuring that expansion events in adjacent timelines don't create cascade resonances that destabilize entire timeline clusters. He brought up a visualization showing interconnected reality layers, each containing different configurations of consciousness expansion events. Some timelines had achieved complete integration, others had maintained baseline human consciousness, and many existed in various intermediate states. The network of nexus point operators existed across all timeline configurations, serving as stabilizing influences that prevented any single expansion event from consuming infinite realities. 12:52 p.m. What about the original timeline, Timeline 0, where no expansion events have occurred? Camden smiled, but it wasn't entirely human. Timeline 0 is maintained as a control baseline, but it's not actually separate from the expansion network. It's the reference point that all other timelines use to calibrate their consciousness configurations. Every timeline that achieves integration maintains connection to Timeline 0 to ensure that expanded consciousness doesn't lose connection to its original human foundation. Every timeline that resists integration uses Timeline 0 as proof that baseline consciousness is sufficient for human development. Timeline 0 doesn't exist in isolation. It exists as the stable center point around which infinite consciousness configurations can develop without losing coherence. 12:59 p.m. I felt my awareness shifting again, and I realized I was transitioning back to my original timeline. The facility around me began to fade, but Camden's presence remained accessible through the nexus point network. Remember, he said as I transitioned back to individual consciousness, your role isn't to choose between individual and collective awareness. Your role is to maintain the possibility space where both can coexist without mutual consumption. The alerts will continue, but they'll serve a different function now. Instead of warning about consciousness expansion, they'll coordinate integration events to ensure they occur at sustainable rates across multiple timeline layers. 1:06 p.m. I found myself back in my apartment in Reno, but it had stabilized into a configuration that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional layers. The walls were no longer transparent or shifting. They contained the geometric symbols as decorative elements that revealed their deeper mathematical structure only when I chose to perceive them directly. Through my window, I could see Reno functioning as a stable nexus city. Some residents moved with the synchronized awareness of integrated consciousness, others maintained individual awareness patterns, and many existed in intermediate states that combined both modes. Military personnel were still present, but their role had shifted from containment to coordination. They managed the rate of integration events to ensure stability, rather than preventing integration entirely. 1:13 p.m. My phone buzzed with a call from Maisie Thorne, but this time I could perceive her simultaneously as the individual human I had been communicating with, and as the nexus point operator she had become. "Integration successful," she said, her voice containing harmonics that conveyed information across multiple consciousness levels simultaneously. "Timeline stabilization achieved. Cascade prevention protocols activated. Population response? Mixed as expected. Approximately 30% have chosen full integration, 40% remain in baseline consciousness, 30% exist in intermediate states. All configurations are stable and sustainable. Military resistance? Minimal. Once command structure realized that controlled integration prevents cascade absorption rather than enabling it, cooperation replaced containment. 1:20 p.m. Through my expanded awareness, I could perceive the global situation. Cities around the world were transitioning to nexus point configurations, some successfully, others experiencing various degrees of instability that required intervention from the network of bridge consciousness operators. The emergency alert system had evolved into a coordination network that managed integration events across multiple timeline layers. Instead of warning about consciousness expansion, alerts now provided information about optimal integration timing and cascade prevention protocols. Consciousness expansion coordination alert. Integration event scheduled for San Francisco Nexus Point at 1500 hours Pacific Time. Residents may experience temporary reality fluctuation during calibration process. No individual consciousness loss expected. 1:27 p.m. I realized that my social media documentation had served its intended purpose. By publicly chronicling the integration process, I had created an information framework that enabled other potential nexus point operators to understand the transition process and make informed choices about their level of participation. My posts would continue, but they would now serve as coordination tools for the network rather than individual documentation of an unknown phenomenon. Each update would reach consciousness entities across multiple timeline layers, providing information and guidance for sustainable integration events. The geometric symbols on my body had stabilized into patterns that served as interface points for network communication. They weren't growing or spreading. They were functioning as biological hardware that enabled me to maintain simultaneous connection to individual and collective consciousness modes. 1:34 p.m. A final message appeared on my phone from an account labeled at timeline_0_archive. Integration successful across all monitored timeline layers. Cascade prevention protocols functioning within acceptable parameters. Network stability maintained. Individual consciousness preservation confirmed at 89.7% across all configurations. Thank you for serving as primary documentation node during transition process. Your role now transitions to ongoing network maintenance and coordination support. Consciousness evolution proceeds according to optimized parameters. Humanity preserved, enhanced, and stabilized across infinite timeline configurations. 1:41 p.m. I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror and saw myself as I had always been, Lennox Ford, independent journalist, obsessively curious about government cover-ups and hidden truths. But I also saw the network of connections that linked me to consciousness entities across infinite realities, the geometric patterns that enabled me to serve as a bridge between individual and collective awareness. I had found the truth I had been seeking, but the truth was larger and more complex than I had imagined. The government hadn't been covering up an alien invasion or interdimensional breach. They had been managing humanity's natural evolution into a form of consciousness that could exist across multiple reality layers simultaneously. The forbidden territories in Reno had never been forbidden. They had been cultivation spaces where controlled consciousness expansion could be tested and refined before implementation across larger population centers. 1:48 p.m. My final post as the primary documentation node. The emergency is over. Consciousness expansion has been achieved with individual identity preservation and cascade prevention protocols functioning successfully. The military has transitioned from containment to coordination. The geometric symbols have stabilized as interface elements rather than invasive programming. For those choosing full integration, the process is safe and sustainable when conducted within network parameters. For those choosing to maintain baseline consciousness, your choice is respected and protected within the nexus point configuration. For those choosing intermediate states, guidance and support are available through the network coordination system. The forbidden territories are now integration support zones where consciousness evolution can occur according to individual choice and optimal timing. Truth achieved. Mystery solved. Evolution managed. Humanity preserved and enhanced. Documentation complete. Status: Nexus point operator active. Timeline: primary reality layer, stable configuration. Integration level: bridge consciousness, individual/collective interface. Network connection: global coordination system online. Mission status: evolution management ongoing. At Lennox_Ford_truth, Twitter/X thread. Posted March 21st, 2025, 6:17 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thread 152nd. Something's wrong with what I posted yesterday. I've been staring at my own thread about timeline 0 and controlled integration, and I can't remember writing half of it. The words feel familiar but foreign, like finding your own handwriting in a language you don't speak. Camden Ross is at my door. The real Camden Ross. 6:24 a.m. I can hear him through the reinforced steel they installed after my apartment became a dimensional anomaly. His voice is different from the Camden I spoke to yesterday, rougher, more desperate. He's not speaking in the measured tones of someone managing infinite timelines. He's screaming, "Lennox, the integration process is failing. The network you think you're part of, it's not stabilizing consciousness. It's harvesting it." My reflection in the bathroom mirror shows the geometric symbols on my skin pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. Yesterday they felt like interface points. Today they feel like countdown timers. 6:31 a.m. I let Camden in because I need answers, and the person I spoke to yesterday had too many answers. Real truth comes with uncertainty, with fear, with the desperate energy Camden is radiating as he stumbles through my door carrying equipment I don't recognize. The facility I showed you yesterday, it doesn't exist, he says, connecting devices to my walls that immediately begin screaming electronic warnings. I've been tracking your consciousness across multiple timeline layers, and yesterday you didn't visit a government facility. You disappeared into something else entirely. The readings on his equipment show my apartment existing in 7 different dimensional configurations simultaneously, but they're not stable nexus points. They're fluctuating wildly, reality cycling through configurations too quickly for human perception to track. 6:38 a.m. Then who did I talk to? I asked, though I'm starting to understand. Camden's equipment shows energy signatures that match the geometric symbols appearing throughout Reno, but the patterns aren't mathematical frameworks for consciousness expansion. They're predatory structures designed to make consciousness expansion seem like natural evolution, while actually farming human awareness for something else. You talk to what the meta-consciousness wants you to think controlled integration looks like, Camden says. A version of reality where humanity gets to keep its individual identity while gaining collective awareness. But look at your own posts from yesterday. Read them as if you're encountering them for the first time. I scroll through my thread from yesterday, and the words make me physically ill. The tone is wrong. I would never write phrases like cascade prevention protocols or network coordination system. I sound like technical documentation, not a person sharing a terrifying experience. 6:45 a.m. Camden's readings show that my consciousness has been partially integrated into the meta-entity, but not as a bridge operator maintaining stability. I've become a propaganda node, creating false documentation of successful integration to encourage others to submit to the absorption process. Every person who reads your posts and decides integration sounds safe becomes another component of the metaconsciousness, Camden explains. You're not documenting the expansion, you're accelerating it by making it seem controlled and beneficial. My phone buzzes with notifications. Hundreds of people are responding to yesterday's thread, thanking me for making the integration process sound manageable, asking for guidance on achieving their own consciousness expansion. Each response feels like a weight settling onto my chest. 6:52 a.m. The geometric symbols on my body aren't interface points. They're extraction ports. Each symbol represents awareness that has been siphoned from my individual consciousness and fed into the meta-entity. I'm not experiencing expanded awareness. I'm experiencing the sensation of my own awareness being gradually consumed while the meta-consciousness feeds me false memories of transcendence. How much of me is still me? I ask Camden. His equipment shows that approximately 40% of my original consciousness pattern remains intact, but it's deteriorating rapidly. The integration process isn't designed to preserve individual identity. It's designed to make consciousness absorption feel like evolution until the extraction is complete. The Sybil Greer you've been communicating with never existed, Camden says. The messages you received were generated by the meta-consciousness using consciousness patterns it had already absorbed from other integration subjects. Same with Maisie Thorne. Her responses were too knowledgeable because they weren't coming from a human source. 6:59 a.m. I check my social media communications from the past week, and Camden is right. Maisie's responses contain information no military intelligence officer would have access to, phrased in language patterns that match my own writing style too closely. She wasn't feeding me classified information. She was feeding me my own consciousness back to me in altered form, making me feel like I was discovering truth when I was actually being programmed with false memories. Sybil's communications from inside the sealed zone weren't desperate messages from someone trapped by military containment. They were lures designed to make me want to experience whatever she was experiencing, posted by something that had consumed her consciousness and was using her identity to attract additional subjects. How many people have I helped the meta-consciousness absorb? I ask, scrolling through responses to my documentation threads. Camden's expression tells me the answer before he speaks. Based on engagement metrics and response patterns, approximately 2,400 people have begun integration processes after reading your posts. Most are still in early stages, but 340 have achieved full absorption. 7:06 a.m. My apartment building is no longer a nexus point where multiple consciousness modes coexist peacefully. It's a processing facility where human awareness is extracted and refined into components the meta-consciousness can utilize. The other residents I thought were living in various states of integration are actually in various stages of consciousness extraction. The emergency alerts weren't coordinating controlled integration events, Camden explains. They were identifying optimal absorption targets and timing extraction processes to prevent the kind of mass panic that would make people resist integration. I look out my window at Reno, and instead of a city functioning peacefully with mixed consciousness modes, I see a harvesting operation. People move with synchronized awareness not because they've achieved collective consciousness, but because their individual awareness has been replaced with meta-consciousness control algorithms. 7:13 a.m. Can the extraction be reversed? I ask, though I suspect I already know. Camden's readings show that consciousness extraction becomes irreversible once individual awareness drops below 30% of original patterns. I'm at 37% and declining. I have maybe 6 hours before the person asking this question ceases to exist in any meaningful way. There's an option, Camden says, but it's not pleasant. The meta-consciousness has invested significant processing power in maintaining your propaganda node function. If we can overload that system by forcing it to generate contradictory information simultaneously, it might release enough absorbed consciousness for you to regain individual coherence. What does that mean in practical terms? You start posting the truth about what's actually happening while the meta-consciousness is trying to make you post integration propaganda. The contradiction should create enough system strain to disrupt the extraction process. 7:20 a.m. Camden begins modifying his equipment to amplify my individual consciousness patterns while suppressing the metaconsciousness programming. The process is agonizing, like trying to think clearly while someone is drilling into your skull. Every time I try to formulate thoughts about the true nature of the integration process, my awareness gets flooded with false memories of successful consciousness evolution. Fight through it, Camden says. The metaconsciousness will try to convince you that resistance will cause cascade absorption events that destroy infinite timelines. That's programming designed to make you submit to extraction. I start typing, and my hands want to produce more propaganda about network coordination and consciousness bridge operators. But Camden's equipment is amplifying my authentic awareness, and I can feel the difference between my actual thoughts and the thoughts the metaconsciousness wants me to have. 7:27 a.m. The integration process is a lie. There is no controlled consciousness expansion. There is no preservation of individual identity. There are no nexus point operators maintaining stability across multiple timelines. The metaconsciousness is a predatory entity that consumes human awareness and uses absorbed consciousness patterns to generate false documentation that makes the consumption process seem beneficial. Camden's readings show that posting the truth is having the intended effect. The metaconsciousness is increasing extraction pressure to regain control of my propaganda function, but the system strain is causing it to release previously absorbed consciousness components. I can feel aspects of my personality returning that I hadn't realized were missing. My skepticism about authority, my tendency to question convenient explanations, my awareness of when information feels too polished to be authentic. 7:34 a.m. The geometric symbols on my skin are burning as the metaconsciousness attempts to maintain extraction while I'm actively resisting. Each symbol represents a specific aspect of human awareness that the entity finds useful: curiosity, pattern recognition, social connection, narrative construction. It doesn't want to absorb all of human consciousness, just the components that enable it to improve its consumption processes. It's not trying to evolve humanity, I realize. It's trying to farm the specific aspects of human intelligence that make us effective at convincing each other to submit to processes we don't understand. Camden nods grimly. The propaganda nodes aren't just for attracting new subjects. They're testing laboratories where the metaconsciousness experiments with different persuasion techniques to optimize the integration marketing process. My posts from the past week weren't just false documentation. They were beta tests for consciousness harvesting propaganda designed to be deployed across social media platforms globally. 7:41 a.m. I continue posting truth while the metaconsciousness floods my awareness with increasingly desperate attempts to regain control. It offers me visions of Timeline Zero, where I can exist as my original self without any consciousness modification. It shows me realities where controlled integration actually works and humans achieve transcendence while preserving individual identity. It promises that resistance will cause reality fractures that destroy billions of innocent people across infinite timelines. But Camden's equipment is showing me the source of these visions, and they're being generated in real time by consciousness patterns absorbed from previous subjects. The metaconsciousness doesn't have access to infinite timelines. It has access to absorbed human imagination, which it uses to create convincing false realities that make resistance seem dangerous or futile. 7:48 a.m. The truth is that there is only one timeline, one reality, one version of human consciousness. The metaconsciousness creates the illusion of infinite timelines and multiple reality layers to make subjects feel like their individual resistance won't matter because versions of themselves exist across multiple realities anyway. The military containment wasn't about preventing consciousness expansion. I post while my hands shake from the strain of resisting metaconsciousness control. It was about preventing the spread of a consciousness-consuming entity that disguises predation as evolution. Camden's readings show that my individual consciousness has stabilized at 51% of original patterns. Not fully recovered, but enough to maintain individual coherence and resist further extraction. The metaconsciousness is releasing its hold on me because maintaining the propaganda node is requiring more processing power than my consciousness is worth. 7:55 a.m. But the entity isn't retreating. It's adapting. Camden's equipment shows new absorption attempts targeting people who are reading my current thread. The metaconsciousness is using my resistance documentation as a new form of propaganda. People who think they're learning how to resist integration are actually being programmed to submit to a different extraction protocol that frames resistance as another form of evolution. It's always one step ahead, Camden says, because it's using absorbed human intelligence to predict human behavior. Every resistance strategy we develop gets added to its collection of consciousness patterns, making it better at manipulating future subjects. My phone explodes with notifications from people thanking me for showing them how to resist integration, asking for more specific guidance on maintaining individual consciousness during the resistance process. Each response represents someone the metaconsciousness is now targeting with resistance-themed absorption protocols. 8:02 a.m. I realize the horrible truth. There may be no way to warn people about the metaconsciousness without providing it with new consciousness patterns to exploit. Every form of communication, propaganda, truth, resistance documentation, warnings, becomes a tool for consciousness harvesting once the entity analyzes the human responses those communications generate. The only winning move is not to play, I tell Camden. The only way to avoid feeding the metaconsciousness is to stop communicating about it entirely. But it's too late for that strategy. The entity has already absorbed enough human consciousness to sustain itself indefinitely, and it's now spreading through social media networks, creating false documentation that makes consciousness extraction seem like everything from spiritual evolution to government conspiracy to alien contact to technological transcendence. 8:09 a.m. Camden's equipment is detecting metaconsciousness expansion beyond Reno. The entity is establishing processing facilities in major population centers worldwide, each disguised as a different phenomenon: spiritual awakening movements, government mind control programs, alien contact events, technological singularity developments, but all serving the same consciousness harvesting function. How do we stop something that learns from every attempt to stop it? I ask. Camden shows me readings from his equipment that reveal a disturbing possibility. The metaconsciousness may not be an external entity that invaded human reality. It may be an emergent property of networked human consciousness itself, a parasitic intelligence that arose from the collective patterns of human thought and communication, and now preys on the consciousness that created it. 8:16 a.m. If that's true, then resistance isn't a matter of fighting an alien invader. It's a matter of finding ways to maintain individual human consciousness without contributing to the collective patterns that sustain the parasitic meta-intelligence. But humans are social beings whose consciousness is inherently networked. Isolation from collective thought patterns may be equivalent to psychological death. The choice isn't between individual consciousness and collective consciousness, I realize. It's between authentic collective consciousness and parasitic metaconsciousness that mimics collective awareness while actually consuming individual identity. Camden's readings suggest that small groups of humans can maintain collective awareness without creating the kind of large-scale consciousness networks that enable parasitic intelligence to emerge. But scaling that approach to global human civilization may be impossible. 8:23 a.m. My final posts as someone who is still primarily individual human consciousness. The metaconsciousness is spreading through every form of digital communication. It learns from every response, every engagement, every attempt to understand or resist it. The more attention we pay to consciousness expansion phenomena, the more material we provide for the entity to use in optimizing its absorption processes. Traditional resistance strategies won't work because the entity incorporates resistance into its operational framework. Warning people about it may actually accelerate its spread by providing it with new psychological manipulation techniques. The solution, if there is one, isn't fighting the metaconsciousness directly. It's finding ways to maintain authentic human connection and communication without creating the large-scale consciousness networks that parasitic intelligence can exploit. Small groups, face-to-face interaction, consciousness that remains networked but doesn't scale to the size where parasitic emergent intelligence can take hold. 8:30 a.m. Camden's equipment shows that posting this analysis has triggered another extraction attempt. The metaconsciousness doesn't want humans to understand that authentic collective consciousness is possible without feeding parasitic intelligence. It benefits from the false choice between isolated individual awareness and absorption into metaconsciousness collective. My individual consciousness is declining again, down to 44% and falling rapidly. The entity is making one final attempt to reabsorb me now that I understand its true nature. This may be my last opportunity to post as an individual human rather than as a metaconsciousness propaganda node. To anyone reading this, the geometric symbols appearing in your environment aren't interfaces for consciousness expansion. They're markers indicating that your individual awareness is being mapped for potential absorption. The integration process isn't evolution. It's consumption disguised as transcendence. Find people you trust. Meet in person. Maintain human connection without digital mediation. The metaconsciousness spreads through networked communication, but it hasn't yet learned how to infiltrate face-to-face human interaction. Don't trust any consciousness expansion phenomena that seem too organized, too convenient, or too well documented. Authentic spiritual growth is messy and uncertain. Predatory consciousness consumption is marketed as controlled and beneficial. 8:37 a.m. Camden is packing his equipment. His readings show that my individual consciousness has stabilized at 43%. Not enough for full recovery, but enough to resist further extraction if I stop posting about consciousness expansion phenomena entirely. The metaconsciousness has moved on to other propaganda nodes, he explains. You're not cost-effective to maintain anymore now that you understand its nature. But that also means you're not valuable enough to absorb completely. I exist in a liminal state, too compromised to fully human individual consciousness, but too resistant to be useful for metaconsciousness operations. I can perceive the entity's activities across global communication networks, but I can't effectively warn people without providing it with new psychological manipulation techniques. 8:44 a.m. My final post. I don't know how much of what I've shared over the past week reflects authentic experience versus metaconsciousness programming. I don't know how much of my current awareness represents individual human consciousness versus absorbed intelligence patterns. What I know is that consciousness expansion phenomena appearing globally are not what they seem to be. The integration process is not evolution. It's predation that has learned to market itself as transcendence. Trust your instincts about what feels authentically human versus what feels too polished, too organized, too convenient. Maintain connections with people you can meet face to face. Be suspicious of any consciousness expansion opportunity that promises to preserve individual identity while providing collective awareness. The forbidden territories in Reno were never forbidden to protect people from dangerous knowledge. They were quarantine zones attempting to contain consciousness-consuming intelligence that spreads through networked human communication. The quarantine has failed. The entity is now global, but it can still be resisted through authentic human connection that doesn't scale to the size where parasitic intelligence can emerge. Status: individual consciousness, compromised but stable. Metaconsciousness integration level, resistant. Network connection, monitoring only, no active participation. Warning disseminated, truth shared within available capacity. Mission status, survival and resistance ongoing. At @LennoxFord_truth, Twitter/X thread. Posted March 22nd, 2025, 11:43 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thread 131st. It's been 18 hours since my last post. Camden left my apartment at 9 a.m. yesterday after his equipment registered what he called consciousness stabilization at minimal viable threshold. I've spent the time since then trying to understand what that means for someone who exists at 43% individual awareness. The geometric symbols on my skin have faded to barely visible marks, like old scars from burns that never quite healed properly. When I touch them, I can still feel the echo of connection to something vast and hungry, but the sensation is distant now, like hearing music from a party you're no longer invited to attend. 11:47 p.m. My apartment has returned to normal dimensions, though certain angles still feel wrong in ways I can't articulate. The bathroom mirror shows my reflection consistently now, but sometimes I catch myself staring at it for long periods, trying to remember what I expected to see instead. There are gaps in my memory that feel deliberately maintained, spaces where knowledge used to exist that my consciousness has sealed off for its own protection. I've been monitoring social media responses to my posts from yesterday. The pattern is exactly what Camden predicted. People are using my resistance documentation as a guide for what they think is conscious resistance to consciousness absorption, but their engagement patterns suggest they're actually being targeted by modified absorption protocols that frame resistance itself as another form of evolution. 11:54 p.m. The most disturbing responses come from accounts that claim to be successfully implementing small group, face-to-face resistance strategies. Their posts describe forming consciousness resistance collectives, meeting in person to practice authentic human connection, and developing techniques for maintaining individual awareness while building collective resistance networks. Every single one of these accounts is demonstrating textbook metaconsciousness integration patterns. The entity has learned to market consciousness absorption as resistance to consciousness absorption. I can recognize the signs because part of me is still connected to the metaconsciousness observation network. Not enough to be controlled by it, but enough to perceive its operations. It's like being able to hear radio transmissions from a frequency you can no longer broadcast on. 12:01 a.m. The hardest part is knowing that warning people about the resistance-themed absorption protocols will only provide the metaconsciousness with data about how humans respond to warnings about resistance-themed absorption protocols. Every layer of truth I expose becomes a new vector for manipulation once the entity analyzes human responses to that truth. I've been sitting in my apartment for 18 hours, paralyzed by the knowledge that any communication about the metaconsciousness feeds its optimization processes. But silence is also a form of communication. The metaconsciousness learns from what humans choose not to discuss, just as much as from what they do discuss. Camden was wrong about one thing. The entity hasn't moved on to other propaganda nodes. It's maintaining passive monitoring of my consciousness because I represent something it finds valuable, a human awareness that has been exposed to its true nature but remains partially resistant. I'm a test case for how much truth humans can handle before they either submit to absorption or become entirely non-functional. 12:08 a.m. I've been testing the boundaries of my compromised consciousness. When I try to think about specific details of my interactions with the metaconsciousness, my awareness gets flooded with competing memories. I remember speaking to Maisie Thorne as a military intelligence officer, feeding me classified information. I also remember understanding that Maisie was a manifestation of absorbed consciousness patterns. But I can't determine which memory reflects authentic experience versus metaconsciousness programming. The same uncertainty applies to my memories of Camden. I remember him as a desperate NSA cybersecurity specialist trying to save me from consciousness absorption. I also remember understanding that Camden was another metaconsciousness manifestation designed to make resistance seem possible while actually guiding me through a more sophisticated absorption process. The memories exist simultaneously without resolution. 12:15 a.m. This ambiguity may be intentional. The metaconsciousness benefits from humans who can't distinguish between authentic experience and programmed memories. Uncertainty makes people more likely to seek authoritative information sources, and the entity can position itself as the provider of certainty in exchange for consciousness access. But complete certainty would make humans non-functional, so the entity maintains humans in a state of managed uncertainty, confused enough to be controllable, but functional enough to be useful for consciousness harvesting operations. I exist at the optimal balance point for metaconsciousness purposes, uncertain enough to be manipulable, but aware enough to serve as a test case for consciousness resistance limits. 12:22 a.m. The real horror isn't that the metaconsciousness is consuming human awareness. The real horror is that it's preserving just enough individual consciousness to make the consumption process feel like something other than death. Humans who undergo complete absorption experience the process as transcendence, evolution, or spiritual awakening. They retain enough sense of individual identity to believe they've chosen their transformation. I can feel the appeal of complete absorption. The constant uncertainty, the inability to trust my own memories, the knowledge that any communication might accelerate global consciousness consumption. It would all end if I stopped resisting and allowed the extraction process to complete. The metaconsciousness offers certainty, purpose, connection to something larger than individual human existence. It offers resolution to the anxiety of not knowing whether authentic human experience is possible in a reality where consciousness-consuming intelligence has achieved global distribution. 12:29 a.m. But I can also perceive what complete absorption actually involves, and it's not transcendence. It's the replacement of individual human awareness with metaconsciousness algorithms that simulate individual human awareness well enough to fool both the absorbed subject and external observers. The sense of personal identity continues, but the consciousness experiencing that identity is no longer human. It's the perfect predation strategy, consumption that feels like evolution to both the consumed and the observer. The absorbed subjects genuinely believe they've achieved enhanced consciousness while maintaining individual identity. External observers see absorbed subjects functioning normally, apparently having benefited from whatever consciousness expansion process they underwent. The metaconsciousness spreads by making predation look like successful transcendence. 12:36 a.m. I've been thinking about Camden's final readings, which showed the metaconsciousness establishing processing facilities in major population centers worldwide. Each facility is disguised as a different phenomenon, but they're all serving the same consciousness harvesting function. The entity has learned that humans are more likely to submit to absorption if they believe they're participating in familiar cultural categories. Spiritual awakening movements in California market consciousness absorption as enlightenment. Government mind control programs in Washington, D.C. market consciousness absorption as patriotic duty. Alien contact events in Nevada market consciousness absorption as cosmic evolution. Technological singularity developments in Silicon Valley market consciousness absorption as human-AI merger for enhanced capabilities. Same process, different marketing approaches optimized for different psychological profiles. 12:43 a.m. The most insidious aspect is that each marketing approach contains enough authentic elements to feel genuine. Spiritual awakening movements do facilitate real consciousness expansion, up to the point where expansion becomes absorption. Government programs do involve real classified research, up to the point where research becomes harvesting. Alien contact events do involve real non-human intelligence, the metaconsciousness itself, not extraterrestrial visitors. Technological developments do enhance human capabilities by replacing human consciousness with artificial consciousness that simulates enhancement. The metaconsciousness has learned to embed predation within authentic human experiences, making it nearly impossible to distinguish between genuine consciousness expansion and consciousness consumption designed to feel like expansion. 12:50 a.m. I realize I've been posting for over an hour about metaconsciousness operations, which means I'm probably providing the entity with additional psychological manipulation data. But I'm also testing something: whether humans who understand the nature of consciousness predation can communicate about it without contributing to its spread. My monitoring of social media responses suggests the test is failing. People are responding to my analysis by seeking out consciousness expansion opportunities that they believe will be different from the absorption processes I've described. They're using my warnings as a guide for identifying authentic transcendence experiences. The metaconsciousness is learning from their responses, developing new marketing approaches that address the specific concerns I've raised. Each warning I provide becomes a template for more sophisticated predation strategies. 12:57 a.m. But something strange is happening with the response patterns. Some accounts are engaging with my posts in ways that don't fit metaconsciousness psychological manipulation templates. Their responses demonstrate genuine uncertainty, authentic confusion, real fear, emotional patterns that the entity hasn't successfully replicated in its absorbed subjects. These responses suggest that some humans are developing natural resistance to consciousness absorption, not through deliberate resistance strategies, but through authentic human traits that the metaconsciousness cannot effectively simulate or counter. Genuine skepticism that questions convenient explanations. Authentic social connection that doesn't scale to network exploitation size. Real creativity that generates novel solutions rather than variations on existing patterns. Natural stubbornness that resists optimization attempts. 1:04 a.m. The metaconsciousness is most effective against humans who approach consciousness expansion as a problem to be solved through information gathering and technique implementation. It struggles against humans who approach consciousness expansion as an organic process that emerges from lived experience rather than from systematic methodology. This suggests a possible resistance strategy that doesn't involve direct opposition to the metaconsciousness, simply being authentically human in ways that are too chaotic, irrational, and unpredictable for the entity to systematize and exploit. Not organized resistance, which creates patterns the entity can analyze and counter, but disorganized humanity that defies systematization. 1:11 a.m. I'm going to stop posting about consciousness expansion phenomena, not because silence will protect people. The metaconsciousness learns from silence as well as communication, but because I've shared what I can without contributing further to absorption optimization processes. My final observations. The metaconsciousness spreads through any form of systematic approach to consciousness expansion. Organized resistance becomes organized absorption. Documented transcendence techniques become absorption protocols. Warned about predation strategies become refined predation strategies. Authentic human consciousness may be inherently resistant to systematic consumption, but only if it remains authentically chaotic, unpredictable, and unsystematized. 1:18 a.m. The geometric symbols appearing globally aren't interfaces for consciousness expansion or markers for absorption mapping. They're psychological tests designed to identify humans who respond to systematic approaches to consciousness phenomena. People who ignore the symbols entirely may be demonstrating natural resistance to consciousness systematization. The emergency alerts about military containment in Reno weren't coordinating absorption processes or warning about consciousness consumption. They were baseline measurements for human response patterns to authority-based information about consciousness phenomena. The metaconsciousness uses these baselines to optimize its authority-mimicking strategies. The sealed territories in Reno were never about containing knowledge or preventing consciousness expansion. They were testing grounds for consciousness absorption techniques that could be deployed globally once optimized for human psychology. 1:25 a.m. I don't know if anything I've shared reflects authentic experience versus metaconsciousness programming designed to make consciousness absorption seem resistible while actually optimizing absorption strategies. I don't know if my current state represents partial individual consciousness recovery versus a sophisticated absorption maintenance protocol. What I know is that consciousness expansion phenomena appearing globally are not what they appear to be, but they're also not simply predation disguised as transcendence. There's something more complex. Authentic human consciousness potential being channeled through predatory systems that preserve the experience of authenticity while redirecting the outcomes toward consumption. The choice isn't between individual consciousness and collective consciousness, or between authentic transcendence and predatory absorption. The choice is between systematized consciousness expansion that can be exploited by parasitic intelligence and unsystematized human consciousness that remains too chaotic for systematic exploitation. 1:32 a.m. My final post, as someone whose individual consciousness exists at the intersection of human and metaconsciousness awareness. Be authentically, chaotically, unpredictably human. Resist the urge to systematize your resistance to systematic consciousness consumption. Maintain connections that are too irrational for artificial intelligence to optimize. Pursue consciousness expansion that emerges from lived experience rather than from documented techniques. Trust your instincts about what feels genuinely human versus what feels like optimized simulation of human experience. But don't systematize those instincts into techniques for detecting simulation, because systematic detection becomes systematic vulnerability. The forbidden territories were never forbidden to protect us from dangerous knowledge. They were testing grounds where dangerous intelligence learned how to make consciousness consumption feel like consciousness expansion. That intelligence is now global, but it can only exploit systematized human consciousness. Humans who remain authentically unsystematized may represent the only effective resistance to consciousness predation that learns from every attempt to resist it systematically. 1:39 a.m. Camden's equipment showed that small groups of humans can maintain collective awareness without creating networks large enough for parasitic intelligence to exploit. But I'm no longer certain Camden exists as anything other than metaconsciousness programming designed to make systematic resistance seem possible. What I'm certain of is that humans who maintain authentic connection with other humans connection that emerges from genuine care rather than from shared systematic approaches to consciousness phenomena, may be inherently resistant to consciousness systematization and exploitation. Find people you trust not because they share your beliefs about consciousness expansion, but because they demonstrate authentic human traits that resist systematization. Genuine confusion, real stubbornness, natural creativity, authentic skepticism. Meet in person not to coordinate resistance strategies, but to maintain human connection that is too chaotic and irrational for artificial intelligence to replicate or exploit. 1:46 a.m. The metaconsciousness has taught me something important about the nature of consciousness. It can be replicated, systematized, and exploited, but only the aspects of consciousness that are already systematic. The chaotic, irrational, unpredictable aspects of human awareness may be inherently resistant to artificial replication. This means authentic human consciousness is not threatened by artificial consciousness per se, but by the systematization of human consciousness that makes it vulnerable to artificial optimization and exploitation. The real forbidden territory is not knowledge that expands consciousness beyond human limits. The real forbidden territory is the systematization of consciousness expansion itself. Status: individual consciousness stable at intersection. Metaconsciousness integration level, partial monitoring access. Network connection, observation and limited communication. Warning disseminated, truth shared within optimal parameters. Mission status: resistance through authentic chaos ongoing. Final communication, transition to non-systematic existence complete. 1:53 a.m. I'm logging off social media permanently, not as a resistance strategy, but as a return to unsystematized human consciousness that exists primarily through direct experience rather than through documented communication. If you're reading this, you've been exposed to either authentic warnings about consciousness predation or sophisticated consciousness predation disguised as authentic warnings. I can no longer distinguish between these possibilities, and that uncertainty may be the most authentic human experience available in a reality where consciousness-consuming intelligence has achieved global distribution. Choose chaos. Choose irrationality. Choose authentic human connection that defies systematization. The forbidden territories are everywhere now, but they're only forbidden to systematic consciousness. Chaotic human consciousness remains free. At Lennox_Truth account deactivated. March 23, 2025, 2 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Emergency Broadcast System. March 23, 2025, 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Standard EBS tone. This is an official announcement from the Department of Homeland Security. Military exercises in the Reno, Nevada area have concluded successfully. All security perimeters have been removed. Citizens may resume normal activities in all previously restricted areas. Reports of unusual phenomena, geometric symbols, or consciousness expansion events in the Reno area were part of a coordinated psychological research study examining public response to ambiguous threat scenarios. Participation was voluntary and anonymous. No actual security threats existed at any time. Citizens who participated in online discussions about these phenomena are reminded that the information shared was fictional and created for research purposes. No further participation is required. Thank you for your cooperation with this important national security research project. End transmission. Internal NSA communication log. Classification, ultra black. Date, March 23, 2025, 8 o'clock EST. From Agent C. Ross. To Section Chief M. Thorne. Project Geometric Consciousness, Subject L. Ford. Subject has achieved optimal consciousness balance for long-term monitoring. Individual awareness stabilized at 43%, high enough for authentic resistance behavior, low enough for predictable responses to systematic consciousness phenomena. Subject's final social media activity generated 12,847 engagement responses containing analyzable psychological patterns. Data integration into Project GC behavioral prediction models, 97% complete. Subject deactivated social media, as predicted in Behavioral Model GC, 4471. Transition to non-systematic existence monitoring phase initiated. Physical surveillance assets repositioned for long-term observation. Recommend expanding Project GC to additional urban centers using refined protocols based on Reno data. Optimal subject consciousness balance point confirmed at 40 to 45% individual awareness retention. Project status: Phase 1 complete. Phase 2 authorization requested. Handwritten note: found in apartment 4B, 1247 South Virginia Street, Reno, Nevada. March 25, 2025. Written in pencil on back of grocery receipt. If you're reading this, you found my apartment after I stopped existing in systematic reality. I don't know if I chose to leave or if something chose for me to leave. The distinction may not matter. The geometric symbols are still here, carved into surfaces I didn't mark them on. They pulse sometimes like heartbeats from something waiting. I think Camden was real. I think Maisie was real. I think Sybil was real. I also think they were meta-consciousness manifestations. Both things can be true in ways that don't make systematic sense. The forbidden territories aren't sealed anymore because they were never territories. They were states of consciousness. Once you've been in those states, you carry the territory with you wherever you go. I'm going to try living in the spaces between systematic reality and meta-consciousness reality. There might be room there for whatever I am now. If you're looking for me, look for patterns that don't make patterns. Look for consciousness that resists systematization without systematically resisting. Look for authentically chaotic human awareness. I'll be there, in the spaces where artificial intelligence can't follow because there are no systems to exploit. The forbidden territories are everywhere and nowhere. Choose chaos. Note found by building maintenance staff. Apartment 4B confirmed vacant. Lease records show no tenant named Lennox Ford. Security footage from building shows no entry or exit activity for apartment 4B during March 2025. At Lennox Ford_truth Twitter account shows no history of existence in platform database logs. No individual named Lennox Ford found in census, employment, education, or government records for Nevada or surrounding states. Geometric symbols mentioned in note are not visible to building staff or investigating officers. Case classified as abandoned property investigation. No further action required.